She's not pretty enough for a man like him." The words cut across the platform like a blade, loud enough for everyone to hear, loud enough for her to hear. Eleanor Whitfield didn't lower her eyes. She picked up her suitcase, walked through 30 strangers who had already decided what she was worth, and stopped in front of the one man whose opinion actually mattered. Her voice didn't shake. "I know what they're all thinking. Say it to my face and I'll get back on that train right now." Nathan Cole looked at her, really looked. Then he reached down, took her suitcase from her hand and said quietly, "The only thing I see is someone worth staying for." If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel and follow Eleanor and Nathan's journey all the way to the end. Leave a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this love story travels. Wyoming Territory, October 1881. The train was 40 minutes late arriving in Silver Creek, and by the time it finally pulled into the station, half the town had already gathered on the platform. That was the thing about small towns. Any event, no matter how ordinary, became a spectacle. And the arrival of Nathan Cole's mail-order bride was far from ordinary. People had been talking about it for 3 weeks. Nathan Cole was not a man who did things quietly. He owned the largest cattle ranch in the valley. He employed more hands than any other operation within 50 miles. His name carried weight in every conversation about water rights, cattle prices, and territorial politics. When Nathan Cole did something, people paid attention. And when word spread that Nathan Cole had sent away for a wife, Silver Creek lit up like a lantern in a dark room. The women of the town gathered on the platform with barely concealed excitement, some pretending they had other business at the station, others not pretending at all. Reverend Patterson stood near the far end with his wife Margaret, both of them holding the dignity of people who claimed they were only there to offer a proper Christian welcome. The sheriff, a broad man named Garrett Hale, leaned against the station wall with his arms crossed, watching everything the way lawmen always watched things, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. And Nathan himself stood apart from all of them. He was exactly what people said when they described him. Tall, hard-jawed, eyes the color of the sky before a storm, gray and flat, and giving nothing away. He wore a dark coat over his work clothes, which meant he had made some effort for the occasion, though you could still see the dust on his boots that he hadn't quite gotten off. His hat was pulled low. His expression was the same one he wore when he was inspecting fence lines or negotiating cattle prices. Completely unmoved, he had not spoken more than 20 words to anyone since arriving at the station an hour early. He had accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Patterson, nodded once, and then taken his position near the platform edge where he could see the track clearly. He had not moved since. People kept glancing at him, trying to read something in his face. There was nothing to read. The train arrived with a hiss of steam and the grinding screech of brakes, and the whole platform stirred, the way crowds stir when the moment they've been anticipating finally comes. Doors opened up and down the length of the train. Passengers began stepping down, a family with 3 small children, a pair of traveling merchants with large trunks, an older gentleman in a fine suit who immediately looked around like he was expecting someone important. And then she stepped off. Eleanor Whitfield came down the train steps carrying a single suitcase that was clearly heavy because she managed it with both hands and a careful, deliberate movement that spoke of someone accustomed to doing difficult things without help. She wore a plain blue dress, practical and clean, but not fashionable. Her brown hair was pinned up neatly, but without ornamentation. She was slight, not dramatically so, but in the way of someone who had worked hard and eaten simply for most of her life. Her face was ordinary. That was the word people would reach for later. Sitting in the saloon, or the dry goods store, or the church hall, trying to describe what they had seen. Not ugly, not disfigured, just ordinary. The kind of face you could pass in a crowd and not remember. The whispers started within seconds. That's her. The voice belonged to Clara Haynes, the dressmaker's wife who had positioned herself near the center of the platform with the strategic genius of a woman who missed nothing. She spoke quietly, but not quietly enough, and the words carried the way words always carry when the speaker secretly wants them to. She doesn't look anything like the photograph. The photograph. That was the other thing people had been discussing for 3 weeks. Nathan had shown it to almost nobody, but somehow everyone had heard about it. A portrait of a young woman, apparently quite handsome, soft features, good bone structure, hair that caught the light. The photograph that had accompanied Eleanor's letter of introduction when she'd applied through the Chesterfield Matrimonial Agency in Chicago. "Maybe it's not her," someone else murmured. "Maybe she's the wrong woman." "Oh, it's her," Clara said, watching Eleanor navigate the platform with her heavy suitcase. "Look at the way she's looking around. She's looking for someone." Well, that was Tom Briggs, who ran the feed store and had never once in his life kept an opinion to himself. He said it with the particular satisfaction of a man delivering a verdict. "Nathan Cole has more money than God. You'd think he could have done better." "She's not pretty enough," Clara said flatly. "Not for a man like him." What none of them noticed, or perhaps what they noticed and simply did not care about, was that Eleanor Whitfield heard every word. She was 30 feet away when the whispers started, and she was 15 feet away when Clara made her final pronouncement, and the platform was not large, and people in the grip of their own conversation rarely think about how sound travels. Eleanor did not change her expression. She did not falter. She continued walking toward the man she had identified as Nathan Cole. He was the one standing apart, the one who looked like he was waiting for something to arrive, rather than someone. And she walked the way she had always walked, which was straight and steady and without apology. But something happened in her eyes. A person would have had to be paying close attention to see it, and nobody on that platform was paying the right kind of attention. Something closed, like a door being pulled shut from the inside. The particular expression of someone who has heard those exact words before and made the decision long ago to keep moving regardless. Nathan saw it, then saw. He had not expected to see anything. He had expected to assess the situation and make a practical determination whether the woman seemed capable, whether she seemed honest, whether she seemed like someone who could help manage a household that had been without proper management for 4 years. That was what this was. A business arrangement dressed up in the language of matrimony, because that was what the territory required. He had not expected to see someone flinch without flinching. Eleanor stopped in front of him. She set her suitcase down on the platform, straightened, and looked at him directly. Her eyes were brown and clear, and contained the kind of steadiness that comes not from certainty, but from having survived uncertainty so many times that it no longer has the power to knock you sideways. She spoke first. "I know what everyone is thinking." Nathan said nothing. He waited. "That you were expecting someone prettier." The platform went quiet. Not completely. There was still the distant sound of the train engine, the movement of people elsewhere on the platform, but the particular small crowd that had gathered close enough to observe seemed to hold its collective breath. Eleanor did not look away from him. "I won't blame you if you send me back. I know I'm not the woman from the photograph." She paused. "I know what I am and what I'm not, Mr. Cole, and I'd rather hear the truth standing here than discover it later when leaving is harder." There it was, the thing Nathan had not expected. Not beauty, not the rehearsed charm of a woman trying to secure a favorable judgment, just directness. Honesty offered plainly without performance at significant personal cost. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. He was not a man who spoke quickly, and the pause that followed was not awkward to him the way it might have been to someone else. He was simply determining what was true. Then he reached down and picked up her suitcase. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was quiet, low, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to carry. "I didn't pay for a picture." Eleanor blinked. "I paid for a person." He looked at her once more briefly with those flat gray eyes. "And I've never judged a person by what strangers say about them." He turned and walked toward the wagon. Eleanor stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she followed him. Behind them, Clara Haynes and Tom Briggs and a dozen other people exchanged glances that contained everything from surprise to disappointment to the particular dissatisfaction of spectators who had been promised a better show. Nathan helped Eleanor up onto the wagon without comment. He climbed up himself, took the reins, and drove out of Silver Creek without looking back. And Eleanor, sitting beside a man she had known for 4 minutes, realized that she could not stop shaking. Not from cold, not from fear. From the effort of holding herself together in front of people who had spent the last 3 minutes finding her insufficient. She pressed her hands together in her lap and stared at the road ahead. Nathan drove in silence for nearly 10 minutes. The road out of Silver Creek wound through open land, and the sky was enormous. Overhead, the kind of sky that made everything below it feel small. Eleanor had not seen sky like that before. Chicago had buildings that cut the horizon into manageable pieces. Here, the horizon simply went on. She didn't know what to do with that much space. "Were you early?" she finally asked. Nathan glanced at her. "At the station." "Yes." "An hour." "I was late," she said. "The train had trouble outside Laramie. I'm sorry you had to wait." He was quiet for a moment. "It was fine. I would have sent word, but there was no way to—" "I said it was fine. Not unkind, just final." The voice of a man who did not require apologies for things outside a person's control. Eleanor absorbed that. "I have to tell you something," she said. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "The photograph," she said. "I need you to understand about the photograph." He said nothing, which she took as permission to continue. "The agency asked everyone to send a photograph. I didn't have one. A neighbor offered to help. She had a portrait done of her daughter years ago, and she thought—" Eleanor stopped, straightened her spine. "She thought it would improve my chances. I told her it was dishonest. She told me that everyone exaggerates in these arrangements, that it was no different from presenting oneself favorably in a letter." She paused. "I should have refused. I know that. And I should have told you before you paid for the passage, and I didn't. And that was wrong of me. I don't have a reason that excuses it. I only have the fact that I was desperate, and desperation makes people do things they're not proud of." The wagon moved steadily along the road. Nathan said, "Are you finished?" Eleanor blinked. "Yes." "All right." He was quiet for a moment. "I knew." She turned to look at him. "The agency has a reputation," he said simply. "I wrote to a man in Denver who'd used them. He told me the photographs were often approximate." A long pause. "I was more concerned with the letters." "My letters?" "Yes." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest. "What about them?" "You wrote about your father," Nathan said. "About caring for him. About what it cost you." He was quiet for another moment. "You didn't write about what you wanted. You wrote about what you owed. That told me more than a photograph." Eleanor stared at him. The road went on. The sky stayed enormous. And she thought for the first time since she had boarded the train in Chicago, with her single suitcase, and her desperate hope, and her terrible secret about the photograph, that perhaps she had not made the most catastrophic mistake of her life. Perhaps. The coal ranch came into view as the road crested a low hill. Eleanor had imagined many things large and imposing, perhaps given what people said about Nathan's wealth. Or neglected, if the rumors about his solitary nature were accurate. What she saw was somewhere between those things. The main house was substantial, 2 stories, solidly built, well-maintained on the outside. But there was something about it. A heaviness, an absence of any living thing that wasn't functional. No garden, no flowers. The trees around the house were there because trees grew there, not because anyone had planted them with care. The curtains in the windows were the color of things left too long in the dark. It was a house that was not a home. "It's large," Eleanor said. 3 bedrooms upstairs, Nathan said. "The one at the end of the hall will be yours. There's a lock on the door." She looked at him. "This is a practical arrangement," he said. "I want you to be clear about what's expected and what's yours by right." "What is expected?" she asked. "The house," he said. "Meals. Help with accounts. I understand you have some education and figures. In exchange, you'll have your own room, appropriate wages, and the legal protections of a marriage in the territory." He paused. I don't expect anything that isn't agreed upon. I want that understood." It was perhaps the strangest marriage proposal or anti-proposal Eleanor had ever heard. "Understood," she said. "Good." He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Welcome to the coal ranch." He climbed down without ceremony and began to carry her suitcase inside. Eleanor stayed on the wagon for one more moment, looking at the house, at the dark curtains, at the absence of flowers, at the life that had been here and then had not. Then she climbed down and followed him. The first week was a study in careful silence. Nathan Cole was not a cruel man. He was a self-contained one, which was a different thing entirely. He rose before dawn, was out of the house by the time Eleanor came downstairs, returned for meals with the appetite of a man who ate because the body required it, rather than because he found any pleasure in it, and retreated to whatever work needed doing until the light failed. He spoke when there was something to communicate. He listened when she spoke. He did not speak otherwise. Eleanor cooked. She cleaned. She explored the house the way she would have explored any unfamiliar territory methodically without disturbing anything, simply trying to understand the lay of the land before making any changes. What she found broke something in her chest quietly and without drama. The kitchen had everything needed to produce food, and nothing suggesting that food had ever been enjoyed there. The parlor had furniture arranged with geometric precision, as though someone had once taken great care over it, and then the care had simply stopped, like a clock that had wound down. On the mantelpiece, there was a single photograph in a silver frame. A woman, young, dark-haired, laughing at whoever was behind the camera, with the particular joy of someone in the middle of the best moment of a good day. Eleanor looked at it for a long time. Then she went back to the kitchen. She didn't ask about the photograph. She didn't ask about anything she hadn't been told. But she noted it the way she noted everything, filed it away, added it to what she was building in her mind about the shape of this man's life. On the third day she found the garden. It was behind the house, and it had clearly been significant once. The layout was still visible under the weeds' raised beds, a stone path between them, a small section that had been given over to flowers rather than vegetables. Someone had put real thought into it. Someone had loved working in it. That someone was not Nathan Cole. Eleanor stood looking at the wreck of it for a long time. Then she went to find Nathan. He was in the barn working with a young horse that was clearly unhappy about whatever it was being asked to do. Eleanor stood at the barn entrance and watched him for a moment, the patience of it, the quiet, steady way he worked with the animal, never raising his voice, never forcing anything, simply waiting out the fear until the horse settled. She filed that away too. "Mr. Cole?" He glanced at her without stopping what he was doing. "Something wrong?" "No, I wanted to ask about the garden." A pause, so small she almost didn't catch it. "What about it?" "I'd like to put it back," she said. "If that would be acceptable." Nathan was quiet for a moment. The young horse shifted. He put his hand on its neck, and it stilled. "It's overgrown," he said. "Yes. Lot of work." "I know." He was quiet again. "Do what you want with it," he said finally. "It's your household to manage." He went back to the horse. Eleanor went back to the house and began making a list of what she would need. She didn't think about the woman in the photograph. She didn't let herself think about it. She thought about soil and seed and the particular satisfaction of returning something to life. By the end of the second week, Eleanor had learned several things about Silver Creek that Nathan had not told her. She had learned them through Ruth Henley, the wife of Nathan's nearest neighbor, who had arrived at the ranch on a Tuesday morning with a pie, and the kind of bright, friendly energy that Eleanor recognized as belonging to a woman who was both genuinely kind and genuinely curious. Ruth was perhaps 45, with red hair going gray, and an expressive face that could not have concealed a thought if it tried. She liked Eleanor immediately and made no pretense about it, which Eleanor found both refreshing and slightly alarming. "I have to tell you," Ruth said, sitting at the kitchen table while Eleanor made coffee, That what Nathan did at the station picking up your bag, what he said, that is not what anyone expected. That man has not done anything that surprised people in Silver Creek in 4 years. What happened 4 years ago? Eleanor asked. Ruth paused. Then, with the care of someone choosing words, she said, "He lost his wife, Catherine. She was everyone loved Catherine." A beat. The fever took her in January. It was fast. And Nathan just closed. Like a door. People tried for a while, you know how people try, and then they stopped trying because he made it clear he didn't want it. She looked at Eleanor. He hasn't had anyone in this house since the funeral. Eleanor set the coffee cups on the table and sat down. "He didn't tell me," she said. "I didn't think he would." Ruth wrapped her hands around her cup. "I'm not telling you to warn you or to upset you. I'm telling you because you should know what you're dealing with. You're in a house with a man who is still grieving, whether he admits it or not. And grief makes people—" She paused, complicated. "I know something about grief," Eleanor said quietly. Ruth looked at her. "My father," Eleanor said. "He was ill for 3 years before he died. I cared for him." She paused. "I know what it does to a person. The way it becomes the shape of everything." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You are not what I expected." Eleanor looked up. "I'm not saying that the way the people at the station said it," Ruth said quickly. "I mean, Clara Haynes has been telling everyone who will listen that you're plain, and Nathan got himself a bad deal." She made a dismissive sound. "Clara Haynes has been waiting for Nathan to be available again since Catherine died, and she is furious that he sent away for someone instead of noticing her daughter. Don't let anything she says get under your skin." "It doesn't," Eleanor said, but Ruth was watching her with the particular attention of someone who noticed small things. "Yes, it does," Ruth said gently. "I can see that it does, and there's no shame in that. Words that have been following you your whole life have weight even when you're tired of carrying them." Eleanor looked at her hands around the coffee cup. For a moment the careful composure slipped. "I heard them," she said. "At the station. Every word. I know." Ruth reached across the table and briefly covered Eleanor's hand with her own. "I'm sorry. People in this town forget that other people can hear them." "They don't forget," Eleanor said. "They just don't care." Ruth absorbed that. Then she said quietly, "Some of us care." The first real confrontation came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after Eleanor's arrival. She was at the dry goods store filling the household order when Clara Haynes came in with 2 other women from town, Margaret Lacey and Dorothea Price, both of whom followed Clara's social lead, the way smaller boats follow a larger one into harbor. Eleanor was discussing the flour order with the store owner, Mr. Garfield, when she felt the shift in the room. The particular quality of attention that meant something was about to happen. "Mrs. Cole." Clara's voice had the bright, pleasant surface of a woman who would describe her own cruelty as simple honesty. "I didn't see you there." "Mrs. Haynes," Eleanor said. "Settling in well?" Clara asked. She had the look of a woman who had spent many years being considered handsome and still lived inside that fact, wearing it like a garment. "I imagine it's quite a change from the city." "A change, yes," Eleanor said. She turned back to Mr. Garfield and continued giving the order. Clara was not accustomed to being continued past. "I imagine Nathan is glad to have someone to manage the house," Clara said, stepping closer, which was both a social move and a territorial one. "He's been so alone out there since Catherine." Eleanor wrote something down in the household ledger she had started keeping. "I heard you were educated," Clara continued. "Is that right? Some schooling in the city?" "Some," Eleanor said. "How useful?" Clara made it sound like the opposite. "Though, I suppose Nathan needed more practical help than intellectual conversation." She smiled at Margaret and Dorothea. "Men like Nathan generally know what's actually useful to them." Eleanor closed her ledger. She turned to face Clara directly, and she did it slowly, the way a person turns when they are making a deliberate choice rather than a reactive one. "Mrs. Haynes," she said, "I've found that people who make observations about other people's marriages usually do so because they find the subject more interesting than is quite appropriate." Clara stiffened. "I don't think Nathan's needs are really your concern," Eleanor said. Her voice was perfectly even. "And I don't think they should be given that you are not his wife." The store went very quiet. Margaret and Dorothea exchanged a look that contained equal parts horror and delight. Clara's pleasant surface went rigid. "I was only being friendly," she said. "I know exactly what you were being," Eleanor said. She picked up her ledger and her household list. "Mr. Garfield, I'll come back for the order Thursday if that works." "Thursday's fine, Mrs. Cole," Garfield said. He was looking at his counter with the careful neutrality of a man who wanted no part of what had just happened. Eleanor walked out of the store. She stood on the boardwalk for exactly 30 seconds, breathing the cold October air, feeling her heart knock against her ribs. Then she walked to the wagon, climbed up, and drove back to the ranch. She did not tell Nathan, but something had changed. A line had been drawn. Not the kind that other people could see, but the internal kind, the kind that matters a place. She had decided she would not go back behind again. That night, Nathan came in late from the far pasture, where two of his ranch hands had been dealing with a problem with the fence line. Eleanor had kept supper warm. He came to the table the way he always did, quiet, contained, the day's work still sitting on him. She put food in front of him and sat across the table with her own plate. They had begun eating together. It had happened gradually without discussion. The first few nights, Eleanor had left food for him and eaten earlier. Then one evening, he had come in while she was still at the table, and he had simply sat down and eaten without comment. And after that, it had been what they did. "I went to town today," she said. "I know. Garfield will have the order ready Thursday." She looked up. "You spoke to him?" "He sent a boy out, said there'd been some talk." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Haynes was there," she said. Nathan said nothing. He continued eating. "She said some things," Eleanor said. "I responded to them." Now he looked at her. "What did she say?" "The usual kind of thing." Eleanor kept her voice level. "Observations about what might be useful to you, what you might need. Questions that were actually statements." Nathan set down his fork. "What did you say to her?" "I told her that your needs were not her concern, and that I knew exactly what she was being." There was a silence. Then Nathan said something Eleanor had not heard from him before. It was not much, just 2 words, but the way he said them with a kind of flat, complete satisfaction told her everything about where he stood. "Good," he said. He picked up his fork again. Eleanor looked back at her plate. The knocking in her chest had subsided. What remained was something quieter and more durable, the specific peace of knowing you are not entirely alone. It was Ruth Henley who told her about Charles Whitmore. Ruth came to the ranch on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of October, and she came with the particular energy of someone carrying information that is too heavy to keep. "I want to warn you about something," Ruth said, sitting at the kitchen table where she had become a regular visitor. "And I want to be careful how I say it because I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily." Eleanor poured the coffee and sat. "Tell me, Charles Whitmore has been asking questions about Nathan's water rights." Eleanor absorbed this. "Who is Charles Whitmore?" Ruth wrapped her hands around the cup. "The wealthiest man in the valley. He owns the Whitmore Land Company, 3 hotels, the Silver Creek Territorial Bank, and about half the judges between here and Cheyenne." She paused. "He has been buying land in this valley for 6 years. He owns everything east of the creek. He wants everything west of it, too." "Nathan's land is west of it," Eleanor said. "Nathan's land has the water rights to Cedar Spring," Ruth said. Without those rights, the ranches on the eastern side of the valley are limited in what they can run. With them, she stopped. Charles has tried to buy Nathan out twice. Nathan refused both times. The second time was not pleasant. Eleanor was quiet. I'm telling you, Ruth said, because Charles Whitmore is not a man who accepts refusal. And he is clever. He doesn't come at people directly. He finds... She paused, searching for the word leverage. Leverage, Eleanor said. People's weaknesses, Ruth said simply. Things they need. Things they're afraid of. She looked at Eleanor carefully. You've been here long enough for people to see that Nathan is different since you came. He's coming to church. He's talking to people more. There's light in those windows at night. She paused. Charles Whitmore sees that, and Charles Whitmore will use anything he can find. Eleanor felt the first cold brush of something she recognized from years of caring for a vulnerable person. The particular alertness of someone who understands that a threat has been identified and now must be prepared for. What does he look like? Eleanor asked. Ruth blinked. Why, I want to know him when I see him, Eleanor said simply. Ruth smiled slowly. He's about 50, she said. Silver-haired, very well dressed. He has a way of smiling that doesn't reach his eyes, and a way of speaking that sounds like a compliment, until you listen carefully and realize it wasn't. Eleanor nodded. She filed this away with everything else. He'll try to use you, Ruth said. I think he's already calculating it. Nathan married unexpectedly a woman from outside the valley, someone nobody knows. Charles will look for anything he can use. She leaned forward slightly. Don't give him anything to use. I don't intend to, Eleanor said. I know you don't intend to, Ruth said, but intent and outcome aren't always the same thing. Just be careful, Eleanor. Charles Whitmore has ruined people who were far more prepared for him than you are. Eleanor looked at her coffee. Then she said quietly, but with a certainty that came from somewhere deep and well-established. He has never dealt with someone who has nothing left to lose. Ruth studied her for a long moment. Tell me, she said, what happened in Chicago before you came here? And Eleanor told her. She told her about her father, the slow decline, the 3 years of nursing the debts that accumulated while she was too occupied with keeping him alive to keep anything else afloat. She told her about the morning she buried him with a borrowed suit and $7 in her purse, and no family left to stand beside her at the grave. She told her about the landlady who gave her 2 weeks because she had been kind about it for 3 months and couldn't extend any further. She told her about walking into the Chesterfield matrimonial agency on a Tuesday afternoon because it was the only door she could see. Ruth listened without interrupting. When Eleanor finished, Ruth was quiet for a moment. You are not what I expected, she said again. But this time it sounded entirely different. I know, Eleanor said. I never am, Eleanor. Ruth looked at her with the directness of a woman who had decided something. I am going to say this plainly because I think you're the kind of person who does better with plain. You came here thinking you needed this arrangement to survive. And maybe that's true. But Nathan Cole needs this arrangement too, even though he will never say so. And this valley needs someone like you, even though it doesn't know that yet. Eleanor looked at her. Charles Whitmore is coming, Ruth said. And when he gets here, he's going to try to find the cracks in this house and pry them open. And the only thing that will stop him is if this house doesn't have the cracks he's looking for. She stood, leaving her half-drunk coffee on the table. Build something solid, Ruth said. With Nathan. With this place. Before he gets here. She walked to the door. Put on her coat. Because I have seen what Charles Whitmore does to people who aren't ready for him, she said. And you deserve better than that story. She left. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the sound of Ruth's wagon faded. She looked at her hands, at the household ledger open on the table, at the frost on the window and the enormous sky beyond it. Then she closed the ledger, stood, and went to find Nathan. He was in the barn. She stopped in the doorway the way she had before. Mr. Cole, she said, I need to talk to you about something. He looked up from what he was doing. "Ruth Henley came by today," Eleanor said. "She told me about Charles Whitmore." Something moved across Nathan's face. Not quite expression. Something below expression. "What did she tell you?" he asked. "Enough," Eleanor said. "She told me enough." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to say?" Eleanor stepped inside the barn. The warmth of it after the cold air outside registered somewhere peripheral straw and horses and the smell of working animals. "I want to say," she said carefully, "that I didn't come here expecting to be in the middle of a land dispute." "No," he said, "you didn't." "And I want to say," she continued, "that if you would prefer I stay out of it, whatever it is, I understand that." Nathan looked at her. "Is that what you want?" She met his gaze. "No," she said, "it isn't." A pause. "I spent 3 years watching someone I loved become helpless while people around us made decisions he no longer had the strength to fight," she said. "I don't do well with watching from the side." Nathan set down what he was holding. He looked at her for a long moment, the flat gray eyes doing something they didn't usually do, which was simply seeing. "Charles Whitmore is going to come for this ranch," he said. It was not a prediction. It was a statement of something already in motion. "I know," Eleanor said. "He will try to use you if he can," Nathan said. "He will say things, find things that will be designed to make you feel like you don't belong here, like this was a mistake." "People have been trying that my whole life," Eleanor said. "I'm still here." Nathan was quiet. "I want to help," Eleanor said. "I understand accounts. I understand documents. I'm not afraid of legal language or legal proceedings." She paused. "I know I've only been here 3 weeks. I know I'm still a stranger in most of the ways that matter. But I am your wife in the eyes of the territory, and what happens to this ranch happens to me too." She held his gaze. "Let me help." The barn was quiet around them. Nathan Cole, the man who had built walls around himself for 4 years, the man who had closed like a door and never opened, the man who had watched his life become something he moved through rather than lived, looked at the woman everyone had called not enough. And he said 2 words. "All right." The word "all right" was not a large word. 2 syllables, 4 letters total. But Eleanor had spent enough time around people who rationed their trust like water in a drought to understand that what Nathan Cole had just given her was not small. She walked back to the house and stood in the kitchen for a long moment, hands pressed flat on the table, thinking. 3 weeks. She had been here 3 weeks, and she had just committed herself to a land dispute with the most powerful man in the valley. She had arrived with a single suitcase and a borrowed photograph and 7 months of practice, pretending she was not afraid. And now she had told a man she barely knew that she wanted to help him fight. She was either very brave or very foolish. She suspected not for the first time in her life that those 2 things were closer together than most people admitted. She opened the household ledger and began making notes. Not about the house, about Charles Whitmore, about water rights, about what she knew and what she needed to know. She wrote quickly in the small, precise handwriting that her schoolteacher had called efficient, and her sister had called the handwriting of someone who wastes nothing. And she did not stop until she heard Nathan come in from the barn an hour later. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at what she was doing. "What is that?" he asked. "Everything Ruth told me," Eleanor said, "organized by what I can verify and what I can't." She turned the ledger so he could see. "I want to understand the water rights first. The legal documentation. Do you have the original deed?" Nathan looked at the ledger, at the careful columns she'd made, at the questions she'd listed with space beside each one for answers. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll get the deed box." He came back with a battered wooden box that had clearly not been opened in some time. He set it on the table, and Eleanor opened it without ceremony and began to read. Nathan sat across from her. He watched her read the way a person watches something unexpected, not with any particular expression, but with the specific attention of someone recalibrating their understanding of a situation. Eleanor read everything in the box twice. She asked questions. Nathan answered them. Sometimes he answered briefly, sometimes in more detail than she'd expected, sometimes with a directness that told her he had been carrying these worries alone for long enough, that having someone to say them to was its own kind of relief, even if he would never have framed it that way. They were at the table until past 10 o'clock. When Eleanor finally closed the ledger, Nathan looked at her and said, "You understand all of that." "Most of it," she said. "The water rights documentation is solid. The original grant is clear. What I don't understand yet is why Charles Whitmore thinks he can challenge it." She paused. "Has he given any indication of the legal angle he plans to use?" Nathan was quiet. "He's been suggesting the original survey was inaccurate." Eleanor looked up. "Inaccurate how?" Claiming the boundary markers for Cedar Spring were placed incorrectly. That what's recorded as my land doesn't match what was actually granted. "That's a document challenge," Eleanor said. "He'd need a surveyor willing to provide false testimony, and he'd need the original survey records to have some discrepancy he could exploit." She thought for a moment. "Where are the original survey records held?" "Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne." "And who controls access to them?" Nathan looked at her with the first real edge of alarm she had seen in him. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Eleanor said carefully, "that if Charles Whitmore has half the judges between here and Cheyenne in his pocket, he may also have someone in the land office." She paused. "Has anyone checked that the records in Cheyenne match what's in this box?" The silence that followed was its own answer. Nathan said very quietly, "No." Eleanor nodded. "That's the first thing we need to do." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "You think he's already moved on the records?" he said. "I think," Eleanor said, "that a man like Charles Whitmore doesn't make his move until he's already won on paper." She closed the deed box. "Which means we may have less time than you think." Nathan stood. He moved to the window. He stood there with his back to her, and she could see the set of his shoulders, the particular tension of a man who has just understood that a fight he thought was still coming has already started. "I have a lawyer in Cheyenne," he said. "Marcus Webb. He's handled my affairs for 12 years. "Write to him tonight," Eleanor said. "Ask him to verify the survey records personally. Don't put the reason in the letter, just ask him to look." Nathan turned from the window. "Why not put the reason?" "Because if Whitmore has someone in the land office," Eleanor said, "he may have someone reading correspondence too." She met his gaze. "Trust is expensive right now. Spend it carefully." Nathan stared at her. He had the expression of a man encountering something he had not accounted for, not displeasure, something more complicated than that. The particular look of someone whose internal picture of a situation has just been revised significantly. "Where did you learn to think like that?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the ledger on the table. 3 years of watching people take advantage of someone who couldn't protect himself," she said. "You learned to see it coming." Nathan was quiet. Then he sat back down, pulled a piece of paper toward him, and began to write. Eleanor watched him for a moment. Then she got up and put the kettle on because it was going to be a long night and some things required coffee. Done. The letter went out the next morning with the first rider into town, and then they waited. Waiting was its own kind of work, Eleanor had learned. It required a different discipline than action, the discipline of continuing to function as though the ground were solid when you knew there was a possibility it wasn't. She channeled it the way she always channeled things that needed to be held at a distance into her hands, into work. The garden was the primary recipient. She had begun clearing it the week before, pulling weeds, turning soil, assessing what was beyond saving and what only needed time. Now she worked at it with the focused energy of someone who needed something to grow. The work was hard and the ground was cold, but she found a rhythm in it, and rhythm was a kind of anchor when everything else was moving. Nathan's ranch hand, a weathered young man named Billy, who was 19 and looked 16 and had the particular wiry competence of someone who had been working ranch land since he could walk, came around on the second day and watched her work for a while without saying anything. Then he said, "Ma'am." Eleanor looked up. "You know," Billy said, "that garden's been dead for going on 4 years." "I know," Eleanor said. "People tried early on," he said. "Mrs. Henley and some of the churchwomen. They tried to get it going again." He paused. "Mr. Cole told them not to bother." Eleanor turned back to the soil. "What do you think he'll say about this?" Billy considered. "I think," he said carefully, "that this time he's not saying anything. And for Mr. Cole, not saying anything is pretty close to giving his blessing." Eleanor felt something quiet and warm settle in her chest. She kept working. Billy lingered. She could feel him wanting to say something else. "What is it?" she asked. "She planted those roses over there," he said. "Mrs. Cole, the first one." He said it quietly with the care of someone handling something that might break. "She said red roses were the only thing worth fighting the Wyoming wind for." Eleanor looked at the corner of the garden he was indicating. Dead canes. The remnants of something that had once been significant. "Do you know what variety?" she asked. Billy blinked. "I know, ma'am." "I'll find out," she said. She looked at the dead canes for a long moment. "I'd like to bring them back if I can, if that would be all right." Billy was quiet. Then he said with a roughness in his voice that had nothing to do with age, "I think that would be all right, ma'am." He went back to his work. Eleanor knelt beside the rose canes and examined them carefully. The root systems were still there, dormant, neglected, but not dead. Not completely dead. She had seen that before. Things that looked finished, that had every reason to be finished, that were still holding on somewhere underneath where it didn't show. She understood that better than most people might have expected. Ruth Henley came back on a Wednesday afternoon with a look on her face that Eleanor had not seen before. A careful look, the look of someone carrying something they're not sure how to set down. "Charles Whitmore was in town yesterday," she said before she'd even taken off her coat. Eleanor put down what she was doing. "What happened?" "Nothing dramatic," Ruth said. "He had a meeting at the bank. He had lunch at the hotel. He spoke to several people." She sat down. "He asked about you." Eleanor sat across from her. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were settled in," Ruth said. "Whether you and Nathan seemed compatible." She paused, choosing the next words. "Whether people thought the marriage was genuine." The kitchen was very quiet. "He's building something," Eleanor said. "Yes," Ruth said. "I think so too. He wants to establish that the marriage is a convenience," Eleanor said slowly, working it through. "If he can create doubt about whether Nathan and I are a real couple, whether this is a real household, then he has a social lever. He can imply that Nathan made the arrangement for purely strategic reasons. That it's not," she stopped. "That it's not a real family," Ruth said. "And that therefore the ranch is more vulnerable than people think." She looked at Eleanor. "I don't know exactly what he plans to do with that. But I know Charles Whitmore doesn't ask questions without a reason." Eleanor thought about Nathan, about the deed box, about the letter to Marcus Webb that was on its way to Cheyenne. "Who did he speak to?" she asked. "Clara Haynes," Ruth said, and the name landed in the room like a stone dropped in water. "Mostly Clara." "Of course." "What did Clara tell him?" Ruth's expression was answer enough. "She told him what she tells everyone," Eleanor said. "That I'm not what Nathan expected. That people wonder whether he's satisfied with the arrangement." She kept her voice even. "That I arrived and wasn't what the photograph suggested." "Yes," Ruth said. "Something along those lines." Eleanor nodded. She was quiet for a moment, turning it over. "I need to change the story," she said. Ruth looked at her. "Clara is telling a story," Eleanor said. "Whitmore is listening to that story and building on it. The only way to undercut it is to change what people see." She met Ruth's eyes. I need this household to look like what it's becoming, not what Clara says it is." "What is it becoming?" Ruth asked. Eleanor paused. "Something real," she said quietly. And then, because that was more than she had intended to say, she moved on quickly. "The harvest social. When is it?" "2 weeks," Ruth said. "Nathan and I should attend together," Eleanor said. "Not as a couple performing happiness, just as two people who are present in each other's lives." She thought, "People need to see that we work alongside each other, that this isn't an arrangement of strangers." Ruth studied her. "Does Nathan attend the harvest social?" "He hasn't," Eleanor said, "in 4 years." A pause. "You're going to ask him?" Ruth said. "Yes." "And you think he'll say yes?" Eleanor thought about the deed box on the kitchen table. About, all right. About the way he'd sat across from her until past 10 o'clock, answering questions without impatience. "I think," she said carefully, "that he understands strategy." Ruth smiled. It was small, but genuine. "Eleanor, you are something else entirely." "I'm just practical," Eleanor said. "Practical," Ruth repeated with the tone of someone who found that word amusing in this context. "Is that what you call it?" She asked him that evening. Nathan was at the table with the account books. He did his own figures, she had discovered, with the thoroughness of a man who trusted the numbers he'd checked himself. She put coffee in front of him and sat down, and he looked up because he'd learned already in 3 weeks that when she sat down without being invited, it meant she had something to say. "The harvest social," she said. 2 weeks from Saturday." Nathan looked back at his accounts. "What about it?" "I want us to go," she said. A pause. His pen stopped moving. "I don't attend the harvest social," he said. "I know you haven't," she said. "I'm asking you to this year." He looked up. His expression said several things without saying any of them. Awareness of why she was asking, resistance to the idea. And underneath both of those things, the particular consideration of a man who is evaluating a tactical suggestion rather than a personal one. "Whitmore spoke to Clara Haynes," Eleanor said. "He's building a picture of this household. I want to give people a different picture to look at." "You want to put us on display," Nathan said, not accusatory, analytical. "I want to appear in the same room with my husband," Eleanor said, "at a community event in a way that makes it very difficult for anyone to describe this marriage as—" She chose the word irregular. Nathan was quiet. "I also want," she said, and this was harder, "for people to stop looking at me the way they've been looking at me since I arrived. I'm tired of being the wrong bride." She said it plainly without self-pity. "I've been here 3 weeks. I've managed this house and worked your accounts and talked to your neighbors and started your garden back up. I would like to stand next to you in public without being described as a disappointment." Something moved through Nathan's face. Not visible on the surface, but she had gotten good at reading the things below. "That's fair," he said quietly. "Will you come?" He looked at his accounts. Then he picked up the pen again. "Yes," he said. "I'll come." Eleanor nodded. She stood up and cleared the coffee cups. "Thank you," she said. "Eleanor." She turned. Nathan was not looking at her. Still looking at the accounts, but his voice had shifted slightly from the one he used for practical conversation. "What you said," he said, "about being tired of being seen as a disappointment." He paused. "You're not. Here. Whatever anyone in town thinks." It was not a large statement. 3 sentences. But it arrived with the weight of something that had taken considerable effort to say from a man for whom considerable effort was required to say almost anything personal. Eleanor held it for exactly a moment. "Good night, Mr. Cole," she said. "Good night," he said, intact. The following Monday, the reply came from Marcus Webb in Cheyenne. Nathan brought it in from the morning mail and set it on the kitchen table and looked at Eleanor, and she looked at it, and neither of them moved for about 3 seconds. Then she picked it up and opened it. She read it twice. Then she set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table, and she breathed very carefully for a moment. Nathan was watching her. "What does it say?" Eleanor looked up at him. "He went to the land office," she said. "He asked to see the survey records for your property." She paused. "The record for Cedar Spring is missing." Nathan went completely still. "Not damaged, not misfiled." Eleanor held his gaze. "Missing. The index shows it should be there. The physical file is gone." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Then Nathan said in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled. He got to the records. "Webb says the clerk on duty told him the file had been requested for review 3 weeks ago," Eleanor said. "By a surveying company. The name of the company." She looked at the letter, "is Consolidated Territorial Survey." "I've never heard of it," Nathan said. "Webb has," Eleanor said. "He wrote that he knows of the company, that it's been involved in 2 other land disputes in the territory in the last year." She set down the letter. Both times the original survey records were challenged. Both times the ranchers lost their land. Nathan moved to the window. His back was to her. His hands were at his sides, and she could see that he was holding them very deliberately open, because what they wanted to do was close. "He's been planning this," Nathan said. "He didn't just start when he came to town. He started before you." He stopped. "Before you sent for a wife," Eleanor finished quietly. "Yes, I think so." "He was waiting until I had something to lose," Nathan said. The words were very flat. Eleanor looked at his back, at the set of his shoulders, at the thing that was happening inside him that he was not going to let show. "Nathan," she said. He turned. She had not used his first name before. She hadn't decided not to. It had simply not happened yet. The moment registered in both of them, brief and distinct. "This is not over," she said. "Missing records are not destroyed records. Webb can petition the land office for a full accounting. There are federal statutes." She paused. "I've been reading about territorial land disputes. The Federal Land Commission has authority over state offices in cases of alleged document irregularity." Nathan stared at her. "You've been reading federal land statutes?" "Since your conversation in the barn," she said. "I asked Ruth's husband to bring me what he had in the way of legal texts. He had 3. She paused. "They were helpful." Nathan said nothing for a moment. "There's also something else," Eleanor said. "Webb mentions in the letter that the Consolidated Territorial Survey Company was incorporated 18 months ago. He says its principal shareholder is a holding company called Whitmore Valley Properties." The room registered that. Nathan said very carefully, "He owns the company that took my records." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Which means he didn't just plan to challenge the survey. He planned to manufacture the challenge." She looked at him steadily. "That's not a land dispute. That's fraud." The word landed in the kitchen with the particular weight of a word that changes what comes next. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "If we can prove that," he started. "We have to be careful," Eleanor said. "Right now we have a letter from a lawyer who noticed something. We don't have proof of intent. We don't have the records themselves. We have the absence of records and a name on a corporate filing." She paused. "That's enough to start. It's not enough to win. What do we need?" Eleanor picked up the ledger where she'd been taking notes for the past 2 weeks. She turned to a page that was covered in her small, efficient handwriting. "The original survey notes," she said. "Not the filed record. Surveyors keep field notes separately. If we can find the original surveyor." "He's dead," Nathan said. "James Farrow. He died 2 years ago." Eleanor stopped, thought. Did he have a family? Nathan's expression shifted. Something behind his eyes adjusted the specific look of a man who has just been handed a direction he hadn't thought to look. "A son," he said. "Henry Farrow. He took over his father's surveying practice. He's in Laramie." "The field notes would likely have passed to him with the business," Eleanor said. "If James Farrow kept thorough records..." He was meticulous, Nathan said. Everyone who worked with him said so. Eleanor looked at him. Then we need to get to Laramie, she said, before Whitmore thinks to. It was Billy who told them that they were already being watched. He came to the house that evening while Eleanor was cooking, and Nathan was writing another letter to Webb, and he came with the careful manner of someone delivering information he knows matters. Mr. Cole, he said, stopping in the doorway. I want to tell you something I noticed today. Nathan looked up. There's been a man at the end of the South Road, Billy said. Yesterday and today. He's not a traveler, travelers move. He's just there, watching. Nathan set down his pen. What does he look like? Young, Billy said. City clothes mostly. Nice horse. He paused. He had a notebook. The three of them absorbed this. Whitmore's man, Nathan said. Maybe, Billy said. Maybe just someone passing through who likes to linger. But I thought you should know. You were right to tell me, Nathan said. Thank you, Billy. Billy nodded and left. Eleanor turned from the stove. He knows we're doing something, she said. Or he suspects. Or he's just covering his bases, Nathan said, making sure I don't move on the land before he does. Either way, Eleanor said, we can't take the Laramie trip quietly. If there's a man watching the road, he'll know when we leave. Let him know. Nathan said with a directness that surprised her. Let him know we're going to Laramie. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know about Henry Farrow. He paused. If he thinks we're rattled and running, he might move too fast. Eleanor looked at him. You want to appear panicked. I want him to think we don't know exactly what we're doing, Nathan said. There's a difference. Eleanor considered this. She thought about the man with the notebook at the end of the South Road, watching a ranch he thought was already in the process of falling. All right, she said. We go to Laramie this week, openly. We say we have business in town, you're buying new stock. She thought. I'll go with you because it's my first time in Laramie, and I want to see it. We behave exactly like a couple on a routine trip. And while we're there, we find Henry Farrow, Nathan said. And we ask him about his father's field notes, Eleanor said, very quietly. Nathan looked at her across the kitchen. You've done this kind of thing before, he said. It was not exactly a question. I've navigated situations where powerful people wanted something from someone I was protecting, she said. It's not entirely different. He was quiet. My father, she added. In his last year, there were creditors. People who wanted to settle his debts by taking things that weren't legitimately theirs to take. She paused. I learned how they think. Nathan said nothing for a moment. Then, with the particular directness of a man who did not give this kind of thing away easily, he said, I'm glad you're here. Eleanor looked at the stove. I know, she said quietly. I'm beginning to think I am too. The harvest social arrived before the Laramie trip, and Eleanor had 2 weeks to prepare for it, in ways that had nothing to do with her appearance. She prepared by talking to people. She had discovered in her weeks in Silver Creek that she was good at something that had never particularly been valued in her before she listened. Not the performed listening of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but the real kind. The kind where you actually tracked what people were saying, remembered it, connected it to other things they had said, and used it to understand them. Her sister in Chicago had always said Eleanor was too serious, too interested in everyone else's troubles, too ready to sit with people who had problems instead of enjoying herself. What her sister had not understood was that Eleanor found people genuinely fascinating. Not their surfaces, their actual architecture, what they feared, what they wanted, what they had sacrificed, and what they were still trying to protect. She had learned in 3 weeks a great deal about Silver Creek. She had learned that the Henley family was the most trusted in the valley, and that Ruth's word carried more social weight than she let on. She had learned that Reverend Patterson was a decent man who tried very hard to be fair in a community where fairness was often inconvenient. She had learned that Tom Briggs, who had said things at the station that had cut her deeply, had a son who had left for the city and never come back, and that his commentary on other people's lives came partly from a well of bitterness about his own. She had not forgiven him for it, but she understood it. She had learned that most of the people in Silver Creek were neither her enemies nor her champions. They were simply people doing what people did, watching, judging, adjusting their judgments when the evidence changed. They had decided something about her on the platform at the station. Some of them were already revising that decision because she kept showing up in ways that contradicted it. The Harvest Social was the chance to change the picture more broadly. She was not nervous about it in the way she might have expected. She was not a person who required admiration, had never been, which was fortunate since admiration had rarely been something people offered. What she wanted was simpler and harder than admiration. She wanted to be seen accurately. She wanted people to look at Eleanor Cole, not Eleanor Whitfield, who wasn't pretty enough, but the woman who had actually shown up and done the work and have some fairer record of her in their minds. Nathan wore his good coat. She noticed that without commenting on it. They drove into town together on the wagon, which was itself a statement of some kind, because Nathan had never attended anything in Silver Creek with another person. He drove in silence, but it was the working silence she had come to understand, not the closed silence of a man shutting her out. The social was in the church hall. Lanterns, tables of food that women of the community had brought, fiddle music from somewhere in the corner. The specific warmth and noise of a community gathered inside on a cold autumn night. They walked in together. The room didn't stop moving exactly, but Eleanor felt the ripple, attention redirecting. People registering the fact of Nathan Cole and the woman who was now his wife entering together for the first time. Ruth was there immediately, with the precision of someone who had been watching the door. "You came," she said, looking between them with an expression of contained satisfaction. "We came," Eleanor said. Ruth steered them into the room with the skill of someone who had been managing social situations for decades. She introduced Eleanor to people Eleanor had not yet met. She included Nathan in conversations with the ease of someone who understood that he would participate on his own terms and did not need to be pushed. She watched the room the way Eleanor watched it, tracking, assessing. Clara Haynes was there. Of course she was. Eleanor saw her across the room at some point in the first hour, saw her see Eleanor, saw the calculation in her eyes. Clara was too socially skilled to make anything overt of it. She smiled at Eleanor when they happened to be in proximity, the kind of smile that required no warmth, and Eleanor smiled back with the kind of smile that required no particular feeling behind it, and they passed each other like ships that had privately decided not to fire. What mattered was what Clara saw. What Clara saw was Eleanor talking with 3 different families. Eleanor laughing at something Ruth's husband said. Eleanor with Nathan not performing couplehood, just present beside him, handing him things, catching his eye across the room, when something happened that they would discuss later on the drive home. The language of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms. It was not false. That was the thing. It had become true in the way that things become true when you actually live them rather than arrange them. At some point in the evening, Tom Briggs found his way to Eleanor. She saw him coming and prepared herself for the specific experience of being in the same conversation as a man who had said things you hadn't forgotten. He was large and a little red-faced and had the manner of someone who was attempting to do something uncomfortable and doing it anyway, which she respected even from him. "Mrs. Cole," he said. "Mr. Briggs," she said. He looked at his boots briefly, then at her. "I want to say what I said at the station, when you arrived." He stopped, tried again. "It wasn't—" Another pause. "It wasn't what I should have said." Eleanor looked at him. "Ruth Henley told me you're the reason the Whitmore situation might have a fighting chance," he said. "That you figured things out that needed figuring." He was deeply uncomfortable, which was its own kind of information. "I shouldn't have said what I said, and I'm sorry for it." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "I appreciate that," she said. "Thank you for saying it." He nodded, relieved to be released, and moved away quickly. Eleanor turned back to the room. Nathan appeared at her elbow. He had seen the exchange from across the room. "What did Briggs want?" he asked. To apologize, Eleanor said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Did it help? Eleanor thought about it honestly. Some, she said. Not all the way, but some. Nathan looked at her sideways. It's a start, he said. She looked at him. Yes, she said. It is. On the drive home, the night was very cold, and the stars were everywhere. Eleanor sat beside Nathan on the wagon, and the town lights fell behind them, and the silence was the comfortable kind. That went well, Nathan said. Yes. Eleanor agreed. Tom Briggs apologized to you. He did. A pause. He doesn't apologize to people. I know, Eleanor said. Ruth told me. Another silence. Eleanor. Nathan kept his eyes on the road. When we get to Laramie, when we talk to Henry Farrow, if the field notes are there. He stopped. Started again. I want you to know that whatever happens with the survey records and Whitmore and the court, whatever it costs this ranch, is not worth more to me than doing this correctly. Eleanor looked at his profile in the darkness. What do you mean? I don't want to win by doing what he does, Nathan said. I want the truth to be sufficient. If it isn't, he paused, then I'll find another way. But I'm not becoming what he is. Eleanor looked at the road ahead, at the dark land and the enormous sky and the stars that went further than she could follow. The truth will be sufficient, she said. She believed it. She believed. She was not entirely certain why she believed it. Perhaps because the alternative, a world in which a man like Charles Whitmore simply won, was not a world she was prepared to accept. Not after everything that had already been paid. We'll find the field notes, she said. We'll prove the fraud, and we'll take it to the Federal Commission. Nathan said nothing, but his shoulders dropped slightly in the way they dropped when he had set something down, and Eleanor looked at the stars and held the cold air in her lungs, and thought about water rights and stolen records and a man with a notebook at the end of the South Road, and she thought, he does not know what he is dealing with. Charles Whitmore had spent his life looking at people and seeing what they appeared to be. He had looked at Eleanor Whitfield and seen a plain woman who wasn't pretty enough. He had looked at Nathan Cole and seen a grief-hollowed man without backup. He had not seen what was actually there. He was about to. They left for Laramie on a Tuesday morning openly the way they had planned. Nathan told Billy to let it be known in town that he was going to look at stock. Eleanor told Ruth, who told 3 other people, because Ruth understood without being asked that information needed to travel in certain directions. The man with the notebook at the end of the South Road was gone by Monday evening, which meant someone had already relayed that the Coles were moving, and Whitmore had pulled his watcher back because there was nothing more to see. That was fine. That was what they wanted him to think. The ride to Laramie took most of a day, and Eleanor spent a portion of it with the legal texts open on her lap cross-referencing the federal statutes on territorial land fraud with the notes she'd been building for 2 weeks. Nathan drove and occasionally asked questions. She answered them. At some point they stopped eating lunch by the road without making a particular occasion of it, and it was only afterward back on the wagon that Eleanor realized it was the most comfortable she had felt in another person's company in longer than she could clearly remember. She didn't say that. She filed it away with everything else. Laramie was larger than Silver Creek and louder with the particular energy of a town that considered itself on the way to somewhere important. Nathan had arranged lodgings through Webb, 2 rooms at a decent hotel, which Eleanor noticed without comment. They arrived late afternoon and agreed to meet the following morning. Eleanor did not sleep particularly well. She lay in the dark and ran through everything she knew about Henry Farrow, which was almost nothing, which was the problem. A son who had inherited his father's surveying practice. A man she had never met whose cooperation she needed, who had no particular reason to give it to her. She thought about how to approach him. What angle? What she could offer that he would actually want. She was still thinking about it when the sun came up. Henry Farrow's office was on a side street off the main road, the kind of location that said a man did solid work for people who knew where to find him rather than needing to advertise. The sign outside was neat and professional. Eleanor approved of that before they even went in. Henry himself was perhaps 30, with the kind of face that looked permanently squinted. A surveyor's habit, Nathan would explain later, from years of sighting lines across open land. He was not expecting them. He looked at Nathan with cautious recognition, and at Eleanor with neutral curiosity. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I haven't seen you in a few years." "Henry," Nathan said. "This is my wife Eleanor." Henry shook her hand with the matter-of-fact courtesy of a working man. "What can I do for you?" Nathan looked at Eleanor. This, they had agreed on the drive, was hers to open. "Mr. Farrow," Eleanor said, "I want to be direct with you, because I think directness will serve us both better than anything else." She paused. "You know who Charles Whitmore is?" Henry's expression shifted, fractionally, but she caught it. "I know of him," Henry said carefully. "Your father surveyed the Cole property in 1873, Eleanor said, including the Cedar Spring water rights. The filed record of that survey has gone missing from the Cheyenne Land Office. The company that requested it is owned by Charles Whitmore." She held his gaze. "We believe your father kept field notes separately from the filed record. We believe those notes would confirm the original survey and make it very difficult for anyone to successfully challenge the water rights documentation." The office was quiet. Henry looked at Nathan, then back at Eleanor. Something was working behind his eyes, the calculation of a man determining how much trouble he was willing to step into. "If I had such notes," he said, "and if I produced them, what exactly would you be asking me to do with them?" "Testify," Eleanor said, "before the Federal Land Commission, that the notes are your father's, that they're accurate, that the Cedar Spring boundary markers were placed correctly in 1873. Henry was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Whitmore is a powerful man." "Yes," Eleanor said, "he is. He has long relationships with a lot of people in this territory." "Yes," she said again, "and you're asking me to stand up in front of a federal commission and contradict whatever surveyor he's paid to say otherwise." "Yes," Eleanor said, "that is exactly what I'm asking." Henry looked at her with the expression of a man who had expected to be maneuvered and had instead been handed the plain truth. "Mrs. Cole," he said slowly, "do you understand what that would cost me if Whitmore decided to make it cost something?" "I do," Eleanor said. "I'm not asking you to do it for free. I'm asking you to do it because it's true, and because the alternative is watching a man defraud ranchers out of land they legally own, and because your father spent his career placing accurate markers and writing accurate records, and that work deserves to stand." She paused. "But I won't pretend there's no risk. That would be dishonest, and I don't do dishonest well." Henry Farrow stared at her. Then he turned, went to a cabinet in the corner of the office, and opened the lower drawer. He came back with a bound leather notebook, old and well kept, and set it on the desk between them. "My father's field notes," he said. "1873 survey, Cole property, Cedar Spring boundaries." He looked at Nathan. "He was the most careful man I ever knew. Everything he wrote is accurate and dated and witnessed." Nathan reached for the notebook. His hand was very steady. "I'll need time," Henry said, "to prepare properly, to go over the notes and make sure I can speak to everything in them." "How much time?" Eleanor asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. "We may not have 3 weeks, she said. Henry looked at her. "Why?" "Because if Whitmore already has someone at the land office, he may already be preparing a fraudulent survey to replace the missing one," Eleanor said. "Once he files a replacement challenging it, becomes significantly harder. We need to petition the Federal Commission before he does." Henry absorbed this. 2 weeks, he said. "I can be ready in 2 weeks, but I need to know." He paused. "Is Marcus Webb handling this?" "Your Cheyenne lawyer?" "Yes," Nathan said. "Good. Webb is straight." Henry closed the notebook and held it. "I'll prepare an affidavit. I'll compile the relevant pages, and I'll come to whatever proceeding you need me to come to." He paused. "Not for money. My father knew your father, Nathan. He would want this to stand." Nathan looked at him for a moment. "Thank you, Henry," he said. It came out rougher than he probably intended. Henry nodded once. "Don't let Whitmore know you have this," he said. "Not yet. Let him think his plan is working." "We intend to," Eleanor said. They were back in Silver Creek by Thursday. Friday morning, Eleanor was in the kitchen when Nathan came in from the yard with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not anger. Something colder than anger. The look of a man receiving news he had expected and hoped was wrong. "Whitmore's filed a motion with the territorial court," he said, "challenging the water rights, claiming survey irregularities." Eleanor set down what she was holding. "He moved fast," she said. "Faster than I thought." Nathan set a paper on the table. She read it. "He's claiming that the 1873 survey placed the Cedar Spring boundary marker 400 yards east of where the original grant specified. That the water rights I've held for 8 years are based on an inaccurate filing." Eleanor read the document twice. Her expression did not change on the surface, but inside she was tracking the language, the strategy, the specific legal arguments being made. "He hasn't filed a replacement survey yet," she said. "He's just filed the challenge. That means he either doesn't have one ready, or he's waiting to see how we respond." "Webb received notice this morning," Nathan said. "He's written asking for instructions." "Tell him to file for a continuance," Eleanor said. "We need 30 days to prepare our response. He's entitled to that under territorial procedure." She thought. "And tell him to notify the Federal Land Commission about the missing record. Not as a complaint yet, just a notification. We want them to know the record went missing before Whitmore files anything else." Nathan looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been thinking about nothing else," she said. He sat down. He looked like a man who was keeping something contained by force of habit. "This is my father's land," he said very quietly. "He built this ranch. He filed those water rights legally. He paid for the survey. He watched Pharaoh set the markers. He stopped." Eleanor sat down across from him. She did not say, "It's going to be fine," because she didn't know if it was. She did not say, "We'll win this," because she didn't know that either. What she knew was something smaller and more reliable. "Your father did everything right," she said. "Everything legal, everything honest, everything documented. Whitmore can challenge that. He can steal records and file motions and hire surveyors to lie. But he cannot change what actually happened in 1873. She held his gaze. "Henry Pharaoh has the field notes. Your father's legal file is in that deed box. Webb is a straight lawyer, and the Federal Commission does not answer to territorial judges." Nathan looked at her hands on the table, then at her face. "What if it's not enough?" he said. "Then we make it enough," Eleanor said. "We find what else we need, and we make it enough." She said it the way she had said things her whole life, not with the adrenaline of someone who didn't understand the stakes, but with the steadiness of someone who did understand them and had decided it didn't change the path forward. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and covered her hands with his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Eleanor looked at his hand over hers, the roughness of it, the size of it, the simple, deliberate warmth of a man who had not reached for another person in 4 years doing it now. She did not move. She did not speak. She let it be what it was. After a moment, he took his hand back and stood. "I'll write to Webb," he said. "Yes," she said. "Do that." She stayed at the table after he left the room, and she breathed carefully, and she told herself she was thinking about legal strategy, and partly she was. Charles Whitmore came to the ranch on a Saturday. He did not send word ahead. He simply arrived a fine carriage, 2 men riding alongside his silver hair and expensive coat, exactly as Ruth had described. He had the confident bearing of a man who had never arrived anywhere and not been received. Eleanor saw him from the kitchen window. She noted everything about how he moved. Then she went to find Nathan. Nathan was already coming in from the yard. He had seen the carriage from the pasture. "Whitmore," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. They looked at each other for exactly 1 second. Together, Eleanor said. Nathan nodded. They walked to the front of the house together. Whitmore stepped down from the carriage with the ease of a man who treated other people's property as though it were his own waiting room. He looked at Nathan first, the instinctive social ranking of a man who recognized male authority, and addressed it first. Then he looked at Eleanor, and Eleanor watched him do what she had been told he did, assessed her with a single quick scan, and filed his conclusion in the particular way men like him filed conclusions about women like her. Negligible. An afterthought. Something Nathan had acquired that wouldn't factor into what really mattered. "Nathan," Whitmore said, with the warm familiarity of a man who used first names as a power move. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," Nathan said. "What do you want, Charles?" Whitmore smiled. It did exactly what Ruth had said, reached nowhere near his eyes. "I think you know why I'm here. I imagine your lawyer has been in touch." He paused with the particular timing of someone who had rehearsed this. "I want to be straightforward with you, Nathan. Man to man. I'd rather settle this without the courts if we can." "There's nothing to settle," Nathan said. "Now I understand that's how it feels," Whitmore said with the sympathetic voice of a man who understood nothing and wanted you to think he did. "But the survey irregularity is documented. It's in the record, and once a territorial court examines it, the record you're referring to is missing," Nathan said. "Stolen from the Cheyenne Land Office by a company you own." Whitmore didn't blink. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious fact," Nathan said. Whitmore looked at Eleanor then. Looked at her with the calculating attention of a man switching tactics. When he spoke, his voice was different, the particular register of manufactured sympathy. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "I understand you recently arrived to the valley, that this situation must be overwhelming." He paused. "You came here for a fresh start. That's admirable. I'd hate for you to find yourself caught in the middle of a legal matter that could drag on for years and cost everything this ranch has." Eleanor looked at him. She let the silence stretch just enough to be uncomfortable. Then she said, "Mr. Whitmore, I've read the motion you filed with the territorial court." Whitmore's expression shifted slightly. Not much, but she caught it. "I've also read the federal statutes governing territorial land commission authority in cases of alleged document irregularity." She continued, "Specifically Section 14 of the 1875 Land Commission Act, which grants federal oversight of any territorial land dispute where original survey documentation has gone missing under circumstances suggesting deliberate removal." Whitmore looked at her with the expression of a man who had walked into a room expecting to find something he could manage and found something else entirely. "Section 14 also," Eleanor said, "requires any company or individual who requested access to disputed survey records to provide full documentation of that request within 30 days of a federal inquiry." She paused. "The Federal Land Commission has been notified of the missing record. That notification was filed Thursday." The yard was very quiet. Whitmore said nothing. "Consolidated Territorial Survey Company," Eleanor said. "Incorporated 18 months ago. Principal shareholder Whitmore Valley Properties." She held his gaze. "You might want to make sure your documentation of that records request is thorough, Mr. Whitmore. Federal inquiries tend to move more quickly than territorial courts." Whitmore stood very still. The smooth social surface was still there, but underneath it, something had gone rigid. "I don't know where you're getting your information," he said, with the cold pleasantness of a man who has decided charm is no longer useful. "But I'd be careful about the claims you're making. Libel in this territory is defined under the 1878 Territorial Statute," Eleanor said, "as a false public statement made with intent to damage. Truth is an absolute defense." She paused. "Everything I've said is documented. Would you like me to show you the filing records?" Whitmore looked at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. He simply stood there in the way he stood, still solid, with the particular quiet authority of a man who did not need to raise his voice. Whitmore's jaw moved slightly. Then he said, "This isn't over." "No," Nathan agreed. "It isn't." Whitmore walked back to his carriage. His 2 men followed. The carriage turned and went back down the road without hurrying, because a man like Whitmore never hurried, but Eleanor watched it go, and she could see in the very controlled way he held himself that something had happened he hadn't expected. When the carriage was gone, the yard was quiet again. Nathan said, "Section 14. "There is no Section 14, Eleanor said. "The 1875 Land Commission Act has 11 sections. Nathan looked at her. "He doesn't know that," Eleanor said. "He'll go home and have someone check, and by the time he finds out I made it up, he'll also know that we've actually filed the federal notification, which is real, and he'll have spent 2 days worried about a provision that doesn't exist, instead of planning his next move." She paused. "That's 2 days." Nathan stared at her. "We needed time," she said simply. He was quiet for another moment. Then he made a sound she had not heard from him before, not quite a laugh, but in the vicinity of one. Something that came from a real place. "Eleanor," he said. "I know," she said. "Don't make legal arguments with statutes I invented." "I wasn't going to say that," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say," he said, "that I have never in my life seen anyone do what you just did." Eleanor looked back at the empty road. "He came here to frighten us," she said, "and he came thinking I was someone he could use to do it. That's the thing about people like Whitmore. They see what they've decided to see." She paused. "He decided I was the plain wife who wasn't supposed to be here. He never looked past that." She turned to Nathan. "That's their weakness. Let's use it." The following week arrived with the force of everything they had been building toward. Webb sent word that the Federal Land Commission had acknowledged the notification and assigned a reviewing officer. His name was Commissioner Harold Briggs, no relation to Tom Briggs of Silver Creek, and he was known. Webb wrote as a man who had no patience for territorial corruption and a particular dislike of powerful people who thought the federal government was someone else's concern. That was the first good piece of news. The second came from Henry Farrow, who sent an affidavit by writer 10 pages meticulous with the field notes of the 1873 survey attached and annotated. Every marker, every measurement, every witness signature. James Farrow had been, as Nathan said, the most careful man anyone who worked with him had ever known. Eleanor read the affidavit twice and felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 3 weeks. "This is enough," she told Nathan. "This is enough to establish the original survey was accurate." "Is it enough to prove Whitmore took the record?" Nathan asked. "No," she said. "Not on its own. We need something connecting Consolidated Territorial Survey to the physical removal of the file." She thought. Webb needs to subpoena the Land Office access records, find out who physically handled the file request, get a name. Nathan wrote to Webb. 2 days later, Ruth Henley arrived at the ranch with her husband James, which was unusual. James Henley was a quiet man who came for dinners and helped with difficult ranch work, and otherwise let his wife handle the social territory of their lives. When he came specifically, it meant something. "Tell them," Ruth said to James when they were all sitting at the kitchen table. James Henley was a large, slow-speaking man with the deliberate manner of someone who chose every word carefully. "I have a cousin in Cheyenne," he said. "Works at the assay office near the land building. He told me something yesterday." Everyone waited. "There's a man named Gerald Poole," James said. "He's a clerk at the land office. He's been there 8 years. 3 months ago he bought a house." James paused. "Gerald Poole earns $40 a month. The house cost $900. The kitchen was silent. 3 months ago, Eleanor said. "About 6 weeks before the survey record went missing," James said. Nathan looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at her ledger. "Gerald Poole," she said. She wrote it down. "Webb needs this today." "There's more," James said. Everyone looked at him. "My cousin says Poole requested a transfer to the Denver land office last month," James said. "His transfer was approved. He leaves in 10 days. 10 days. Eleanor's pen stopped moving. "If he leaves the territory," she said carefully, "he's outside the range of a territorial subpoena." "Yes," James said. "Webb needs to file for an emergency federal subpoena," Eleanor said, already turning to a clean page in the ledger. "Today, this afternoon." She started writing. "Federal employees are within federal jurisdiction regardless of what territory they're in, but it's significantly cleaner if we get to him before he moves." She looked up. "Nathan?" Nathan was already standing. "I'll ride to the telegraph office now." "Wait," Eleanor said. She was writing rapidly. "Take this with you. These are the specific grounds Webb needs for the emergency filing. If he gets the right language in front of the commissioner today, we can have the subpoena by Thursday." She handed him the paper. Nathan read it quickly. He looked at her. "How do you know the right language?" "I've been reading Webb's filings," she said. "Every one he's sent us. I paid attention to how he structures the legal argument." Nathan folded the paper and put it in his coat. James Henley watched this exchange with the expression of a man quietly revising an opinion. Nathan left. Eleanor turned back to the table and looked at James and Ruth. "Thank you," she said. "Both of you. Your cousin's information may be the difference." Ruth waved it off. "Gerald Poole bought a house he couldn't afford," she said. "That's not hard to notice if you're paying attention." "Most people aren't paying attention," Eleanor said. "Most people," Ruth said, "don't have a reason to." She looked at Eleanor with the direct warmth of someone who had decided long ago that this woman was her people. "You give people a reason." The subpoena was filed Thursday. Gerald Poole was served Friday morning. Webb sent word by Ryder that Poole, confronted with a federal subpoena and a specific accounting of his recent financial activity, had retained a lawyer within 2 hours. That was its own answer. Innocent men who had simply moved a file didn't hire lawyers within 2 hours of being served. Nathan read Webb's letter standing in the kitchen, and his expression was the contained version of something larger. "He'll talk," Eleanor said. "Webb thinks so too," Nathan said. "He says Poole was hired to make the file disappear and then alert Whitmore's man when it was done. He was paid through an intermediary, so there was no direct connection to Whitmore." He paused. "But Webb says the money trail goes back 3 steps to Whitmore Valley Properties." 3 steps is traceable," Eleanor said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Whitmore doesn't know about Poole yet," Eleanor said. "He doesn't know we have the name. He thinks we're still trying to establish that the record went missing through normal channels." "He's wrong," Nathan said. "He's been wrong about a lot of things," Eleanor said. That was the moment Whitmore chose to make his next move. The letter arrived Saturday afternoon. It was addressed to Nathan, but the messenger, a young man from the hotel in town, not someone who usually ran errands for the Whitmore operation, said he'd been instructed to wait for a response. Eleanor watched Nathan read it. She watched his jaw set. He handed it to her without a word. She read it. It was elegantly written, which was its own kind of threat. It made no accusations. It extended what it called a final opportunity for private resolution, an offer to purchase the Cole Ranch at a price it described as generous. The price was fair, not extraordinary, but fair. The letter noted that the territorial court proceeding would be lengthy and expensive, that the uncertainty of the water rights situation would significantly impact the ranch's operational capacity in the interim, and that Charles Whitmore was extending this offer out of respect for the Cole family's long history in the valley. At the very end, almost as a postscript, the letter noted that Nathan's new domestic arrangement had been a source of much community discussion, and that Charles Whitmore hoped the adjustment of settling a new bride was going smoothly, and that Eleanor was finding Silver Creek a comfortable home despite the challenges of arriving as a stranger. Eleanor read that last paragraph 3 times. She set the letter down. She looked at the messenger boy, who was perhaps 15 and clearly uncomfortable, and she said, "Please tell Mr. Whitmore that there will be no response today." The boy left. Nathan looked at Eleanor. "That last paragraph." I know, she said. He's threatening you, Nathan said. Not directly, but that's what it is. He's saying he can make life difficult for you in this community. He's saying he knows I'm the pressure point, Eleanor said. Her voice was very level. He's saying that if he can make me miserable enough, if he can make me doubt whether I belong here, whether this is worth staying for, I'll either leave or I'll push you to settle. She paused. He's wrong. Nathan looked at her. But he's not stupid, she said. He's identified the thing he thinks is fragile, which means we need to take that fragility away from him. She met Nathan's eyes. He thinks I don't belong here. He thinks I'm still the woman from the train station that everyone was whispering about. The one who wasn't enough. She paused. I need to stop being that woman, publicly and completely. You already have, Nathan said. Not completely, she said. Not in a way that can't be undone by a campaign from someone with Whitmore's resources. She thought. He's going to go after my credibility next. Whatever he does with Poole, whatever story he builds when the subpoena comes to light, he'll attach it to me somehow. Make me look like an outsider who's caused trouble, who came here for the wrong reasons. What do you want to do? Nathan asked. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. She thought about Clara Haynes at the dry goods store, about Tom Briggs and his clumsy apology at the Harvest Social, about Ruth Henley saying, build something solid, about Billy talking quietly about red roses and a woman who thought they were worth fighting the Wyoming wind for. She thought about the garden which was growing now, slowly but growing. I want to call a meeting, she said. Nathan looked at her. What kind of meeting? The ranchers Whitmore has gone after, she said. The families who've had land disputes with him. I want to talk to them. She paused. If Whitmore has done this to us, he's done versions of it to others, and those others may have pieces of what we need. She looked at Nathan. A single missing record is a case. A pattern is a different thing entirely. A federal commission doesn't just look at one transaction. They look at conduct. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Ruth would know who to ask, he said. Yes, Eleanor said. She would. Eleanor? Nathan said. He said her name the way he had started saying it recently, not as a signal that something important was coming, just as a word that he had found a use for that he said because he meant to. You came here because you needed a way out of Chicago. She looked at him. You came because you were desperate, he said. It wasn't unkind. It was simply honest, the way Nathan Cole was always simply honest. And instead, you've ended up in the middle of this. Yes, she said. Are you sorry for it? She thought about that. Honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. No, she said. I came here because I had nothing left and no direction. And now I have... She paused, finding the right words. A direction. Work that matters. People worth protecting. She held his gaze. I'm not sorry for any of it. Nathan nodded. Then he said something he had been carrying for longer than this conversation. She could tell by the way it came out slowly, with the weight of something that had traveled a distance to get there. When Catherine died, he said, I decided certain things were finished for me. Not as grief exactly, as conclusion. I thought I had lived the part of my life that included... He stopped, then continued, other people, in any real way. He looked at her. I was wrong about that. The kitchen was completely quiet. Eleanor looked at this man who fixed fences and trained horses, and had not spoken his wife's name to another living person in 4 years, and who had just said something that had cost him something real to say. She said very carefully, I know. Because she did. We should write to Ruth tonight, she said. About the meeting. Yes, he said. We should. And they went back to work. The meeting happened 5 days later at the Henley Ranch because Ruth said her table was large enough and her coffee was better than the church halls. 9 families came. Eleanor had not expected 9. She had hoped for 5 or 6. 9 families representing between them nearly 14,000 acres of land that either bordered Whitmore's holdings or contained water or mineral rights he had shown interest in. They told their stories around Ruth's table, these families, and Eleanor listened with the same quality of attention she brought to everything tracking, connecting, finding the architecture underneath the surface. What she found was this: Charles Whitmore had a method. He started with documentation. Every time he found or manufactured a discrepancy in the original filing. Missing records, disputed boundaries, questioned survey accuracy. He used it to file a motion, create uncertainty, apply pressure. Then he made an offer. The offer was always fair, not exploitative, not obviously predatory. Just fair enough that a family staring at years of expensive legal uncertainty might reasonably take it. 2 families had taken the offer. They sat at the table with the specific silence of people who had made a decision they couldn't unmake. "He knew you'd take it," Eleanor said, not accusingly. "He designed the pressure specifically to bring you to the offer. The timing, the amount, the way the legal threat was worded, all of it was calibrated." She paused. "That's not opportunism. That's a system." "Can we prove it's a system?" asked Robert Walsh, who had been fighting Whitmore over mineral rights for 18 months and had the exhausted energy of a man running out of rope. "We can document it," Eleanor said. "Every case, every filing, every offer. Pattern of conduct." She looked around the table. "The Federal Commission has authority to investigate systematic fraud against land grant holders. A single case is a dispute. 9 cases with the same methodology is a scheme." She paused. "I want to compile everything. Every motion he filed, every irregularity he claimed, every offer he made. Dates, amounts, the names of the surveyors he used. All of it." The room was quiet. Then Margaret Walsh, Robert's wife, a woman Eleanor had not yet met, small and precise, and clearly the one who had been holding the legal documents together in that household, said, "I have everything. I kept copies of everything. I didn't know why. Just habit." Eleanor looked at her. "I kept copies too," said another woman at the table. And then another. The women of the valley, it turned out, had been keeping records, not because anyone had told them to. Not because they had a legal strategy. Because they were women who had lived with uncertainty long enough to understand that documentation was the one hedge against it that actually worked. Eleanor looked at the stack of papers that gradually accumulated in the center of Ruth's table, and she felt something move through her. Not triumph exactly, because they were nowhere near the end of this, but something adjacent to it. The particular feeling of pieces coming together into a shape that meant something. Nathan, sitting beside her, reached under the table and briefly pressed her hand. She didn't look at him. She squeezed his hand once and let go. "Here's what we do," Eleanor said. And she laid out the next steps: Webb's federal filing, the pool subpoena, the affidavit from Henry Farrow. And now this, a systematic documentation of Whitmore's method across 9 different landholdings to be compiled and submitted to the Federal Commission as evidence of a coordinated scheme. Robert Walsh said at the end of it, "Mrs. Cole, how do you know all of this?" Eleanor thought about Chicago and her father's creditors, about the legal texts James Henley had brought her, about nights at the kitchen table with Nathan and the deed box, and everything she hadn't known 3 weeks ago and had learned since. "I had a reason to learn," she said simply. Walsh nodded. "And we have a reason to fight," said the woman who had kept copies of everything. Ruth stood to refill the coffee, and she caught Eleanor's eye across the table, and what passed between them needed no words. The week after the meeting, Whitmore made his mistake. It was not a dramatic mistake. It was the kind a careful man makes when he discovers that a situation he thought he understood has turned into something else, and he moves 1 degree too fast in response. He went to Clara Haynes. That was what Ruth told Eleanor, arriving at the ranch on a Thursday morning with the energized expression of someone delivering information that changes the picture. He sat with her for 2 hours at the hotel, Ruth said. And afterward, Clara started telling people very selectively, very deliberately, that there were questions about whether your marriage to Nathan was contracted in good faith, that you had misrepresented yourself to the agency, that Nathan was looking into whether there were grounds to, she paused, to contest the validity of the marriage. Eleanor sat very still, He's trying to destabilize you, Ruth said. If people think your marriage is in question, your standing in this community goes with it. And if your standing goes, then everything I've been building with the ranchers loses its authority, Eleanor said. Because I'm no longer Nathan's wife in any meaningful sense. I'm just a woman who came from Chicago and caused trouble. Yes, Ruth said. Did anyone believe her? Eleanor asked. Ruth hesitated. Some, she said. Clara is convincing when she wants to be. And people, she stopped. People were already uncertain about me, Eleanor said. Yes, Ruth said quietly. I'm sorry. Eleanor looked at her hands on the table. She was quiet for a moment, and in that moment, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. This particular cruelty, this targeted use of the thing she had been most vulnerable about. Her legitimacy. Her right to be here. The question of whether she belonged. Then she looked up. Where is Nathan? She asked. Ruth blinked. He was in the yard when I came in. Eleanor stood. She walked out of the kitchen to the yard, and Nathan was there near the fence, and she could see by the set of him that Billy or one of the other hands had already told him. She walked up to him. You've heard, she said. Yes. His voice was very flat. What do you want to do? Nathan turned to look at her fully. The gray eyes were doing the thing they sometimes did. Seeing her clearly taking in what was actually there, rather than what he expected to find. I want to go to town, he said. Today, together. And I want to walk into the dry goods store and the bank and the Reverend's office, and I want everyone in Silver Creek to see that what Clara Haynes is saying has no foundation in this world. Eleanor held his gaze. And then, Nathan said, I want to go to Marcus Webb and ask him what we need to file a defamation claim against Charles Whitmore for the damage his campaign is doing to your reputation. Defamation requires proof of knowing falsity, Eleanor said. Clara Haynes knowing it's false and saying it anyway probably counts, Nathan said. Probably. Eleanor agreed. Will you come to town with me? Nathan asked. It was such a simple question, such a direct one. Would she come to town with him in the way that meant something, in the way that could not be misread or reframed or turned into something smaller than it was? Yes, Eleanor said. Let me get my coat. She turned back to the house, and Nathan Cole, who had not told anyone what he felt about anything in 4 years, stood in the yard of his father's ranch, and understood something he had not been expecting to understand when he sent away to Chicago for a practical arrangement. The woman walking back into that house was not what anyone in Silver Creek had predicted. She was not what he had predicted. She was something none of them had been ready for, and Whitmore least of all. They drove into Silver Creek side by side, and Nathan did not rush it. He drove at the pace of a man who had nowhere to hide and no intention of hiding. And Eleanor sat beside him with her hands in her lap, and her spine straight, and her eyes forward. And anyone watching them come down the main street would have seen exactly what Nathan intended them to see, a husband and wife together, unhurried, unashamed. The first stop was the dry goods store. Garfield looked up when they came in, and his expression went through several things, quickly surprise, relief, and the particular discomfort of a man who had heard things he hadn't known what to do with. Mrs. Cole, he said. Nathan? Morning, Garfield, Nathan said. We need to settle the household account and place the November order. He said it with the complete normality of a man doing ordinary business on an ordinary Thursday morning. Eleanor opened her household ledger and began reading the order aloud. Flour, sugar, coffee lamp oil, thread, 2 yards of wool flannel, and Garfield wrote it down with the focused attention of someone grateful to have something uncomplicated to do. 2 women were already in the store. Eleanor recognized one of them, a Mrs. Dwyer who attended Reverend Patterson's church, and had nodded at Eleanor exactly once in passing without warmth. She was watching now. Eleanor noted it and continued reading from her ledger. When they had finished the order, Nathan paid, and Eleanor thanked Garfield by name, and they left. On the boardwalk outside, Eleanor said quietly, Mrs. Dwyer will have spoken to 3 people before we reach the bank. Good, Nathan said. The bank was next. Then the feed store where Tom Briggs saw them and nodded at Eleanor with the subdued courtesy of a man still managing his own recent history with her. Then, because Eleanor had thought this through, the Reverend's office. Reverend Patterson was genuinely glad to see Nathan. That much was obvious and real, the warmth of a man who had watched someone he respected close himself off and had not stopped hoping. He shook Nathan's hand and then looked at Eleanor with the particular attention of a decent person trying to take an accurate measure. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "I've been meaning to come by the ranch and welcome you properly. I'm afraid I've let too much time pass." "Not at all, Reverend," Eleanor said. "I've been meaning to visit. Nathan tells me you've known each other since he was a boy." Patterson's face did something complicated with happiness. "Since he was about 12 and convinced he could break every horse in the territory," he said. He looked at Nathan with obvious affection. "He's somewhat more patient now." "Somewhat," Nathan said, and that dry, near humor in his voice, the one Eleanor had come to recognize and quietly value, was there for Patterson to hear too. They stayed 20 minutes, long enough to be seen, long enough for the conversation to be real rather than performed. Walking back to the wagon afterward, Eleanor said, "That helped." "Patterson will say something from the pulpit on Sunday," Nathan said. "Not about any of this directly, but about community. About people deserving fair judgment." He paused. "He's been wanting a reason." Eleanor looked at him sideways. "You knew that before we went in?" "Yes," he said. She absorbed that. "You know this town better than you let on." "I grew up here," he said simply. She thought about that, about the long history underneath the 4 years of withdrawal, about all the relationships and knowledge that had gone quiet, but not away. Nathan Cole had resources she hadn't fully accounted for. "What else haven't you let on?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment in the considering way. Then he said, "The judge assigned to Whitmore's territorial filing, Judge Abernathy." "What about him?" "He and Whitmore have done business together for 6 years, Nathan said. "Webb flagged it early, which is part of why I was glad when you suggested the federal commission instead of fighting this in territorial court." Eleanor stopped walking. "Whitmore planned for territorial court," she said. "He picked his motion knowing Abernathy would hear it." "Yes," Nathan said. Then, "But he didn't account for the federal commission angle," Eleanor said. "Because to get to the commission, you need evidence of systematic fraud across multiple holdings, and he didn't think anyone would be able to put that together." "He didn't think anyone would try," Nathan said. "Because he looked at this valley and saw people who were isolated from each other," Eleanor said. "Individual ranchers, individual disputes, no coordination." She looked at Nathan. "He didn't know Ruth Henley would introduce me to all of them within a month." Nathan's expression was something she didn't quite have a name for yet, something warm and specific that lived underneath the usual flatness. "He didn't know you," he said. She turned and kept walking to the wagon. "We need to get the compiled documentation to Webb today," she said. "Everything from the 9 families. If Whitmore gets wind that we've been talking to the other ranchers, he'll move to discredit the effort before it reaches the commission." "I'll ride to Webb's office myself," Nathan said. "Tomorrow morning." "Take me with you," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "Webb needs to hear some of this from me directly," she said. "The legal framework for the systematic fraud argument, I want to walk him through it. I don't want it lost in translation." Nathan handed her up onto the wagon. "All right," he said. It had become, she realized, the thing he said when he meant yes and more than yes. Webb's office in Cheyenne was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like paper and old wood, and Marcus Webb himself was a compact, precise man of about 50 who greeted Nathan with the ease of a 12-year professional relationship and looked at Eleanor with the sharp assessment of someone who evaluated people for a living. She had prepared for that look. She shook his hand, sat down, opened her ledger, and began talking. 15 minutes later, Webb leaned back in his chair and looked at Nathan with an expression that said several things without saying any of them. "You should have brought her to see me 3 weeks ago," he said. "She hadn't finished reading all your filings yet," Nathan said. Webb made a sound that was nearly a laugh. He turned back to Eleanor. "The systematic fraud argument is viable," he said. "I've been thinking along those lines since the second rancher contacted me, but I didn't have the documentation across all 9 cases." He looked at the stack of papers she had brought. "With this, we have something significantly stronger than a property dispute." "How much stronger?" Eleanor asked. "The kind of case the commission assigns a full investigator to," Webb said, "rather than a reviewing officer." He paused. "That takes longer, but it means the outcome is enforceable across all 9 holdings, not just yours." "How much longer?" Eleanor asked. 8 weeks minimum for a full investigation," Webb said. "Possibly 12. "Can we keep the ranch solvent through 12 weeks of legal uncertainty?" Eleanor asked Nathan. "Yes," he said. "Tight, but yes." "Then we do it right," Eleanor said. She looked at Webb. "What do you need from us?" Webb put his hands on the desk and listed it out. Affidavits from each of the 9 families, formal deposition from Henry Farrow the pool subpoena, results the Consolidated Territorial Survey, corporate filing documentation. He needed Eleanor's compiled analysis of Whitmore's pattern of conduct in a formal written statement because he had come to the conclusion in the last 20 minutes that she was better than most lawyers he knew at organizing a factual argument. He said this plainly without flattery, which meant Eleanor received it. "One more thing," Webb said at the end of the meeting. He looked at Eleanor carefully. "The campaign against your personal reputation, the things Clara Haynes has been saying. Whitmore's directing it," Eleanor said. "I believe that too," Webb said. "But proving it is harder than proving the land fraud. Social pressure doesn't leave the kind of paper trail that a corporate filing does." He paused. "What concerns me is the collateral effect. If your credibility in the valley is successfully damaged, if Whitmore can make people see you as an unreliable outsider, it weakens the testimony of the ranchers who've been following your lead." Eleanor understood exactly what he was saying. "He's trying to collapse the coalition by discrediting me," she said. "Yes," Webb said. "You're the connective tissue. Remove you, and the 9 families go back to being 9 separate disputes." Nathan said very quietly, "He's not removing her." Webb looked at him. "She is my wife," Nathan said. The words were simple, and they arrived with the particular weight of things that are said because they are true, rather than because they need to be said. Whatever Whitmore tells people, whatever Clara Haynes says on his behalf, that is a fact that is not in question. Webb nodded slowly. "Then make sure people see it as a fact," he said. "Continuously. Don't give him the silence that lets rumors fill in." "We understand," Eleanor said. On the ride back from Cheyenne, the day was cold and bright, and the land went on in every direction further than Eleanor had ever been able to see from anywhere she'd lived before. She had grown up in a city of edges, buildings, corners, streets that turned and limited what you could see to the next block and the one after that. Here, the world simply continued uninterrupted, insisting on its own enormity. She had stopped finding it unsettling 3 weeks ago. "Nathan?" she said. "Yes. Will you tell me about Catherine?" The silence that followed was long. Long enough that she thought she might have crossed a line. Then he said, "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me," she said. "I'm not asking to understand the marriage or to compare. I'm asking because she was someone who mattered to you, and things that matter to you matter to me. That's all." He was quiet for another long moment. "She loved this land," he said finally. "Not the way I do. I love it because it's work, because it's real. She loved it because she thought it was beautiful." He paused. "She was right. I just forgot how to see it for a while." Eleanor looked at the land going on and on around them. "The garden," she said. "She planted it the first spring we were married," he said. "Said a house needed something growing beside it, or it was just a building." He drove in silence for a moment. "After she died, I couldn't look at it. I told myself it was because I didn't have time. But the hands offered to maintain it, and I told them to leave it." "Because it was hers," Eleanor said. Yes, he said. And now I'm putting it back, Eleanor said carefully. If that's... I know, he said. I've been watching you do it. She waited. I think she'd have liked you, he said. It came out roughly, not smoothly, the roughness of something real. She had no patience for people who needed to be admired. She liked people who worked. Eleanor looked at the road ahead. I found the rose canes, she said. Billy told me she planted them. I think they're still viable. The root systems are deeper than the canes suggest. She'd have said that was a metaphor for something, Nathan said. What would she have said? It was a metaphor for... He thought about it. People, he said. She thought most people were like that. Looked dead on the surface and very much alive underneath if you knew where to look. Eleanor absorbed that. She was right, she said quietly. Nathan looked at her once briefly and then back at the road, and they drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence of two people who had said something real and did not need to say anything more. Gerald Poole broke on a Tuesday. Webb sent a rider with the news, and the rider arrived at the ranch while Eleanor was working in the garden with Billy. She read the letter twice standing in the dirt, and then went inside to find Nathan. He was at the kitchen table with the account books. She set the letter in front of him. He read it. His expression did not change dramatically, but something in his chest that held tension, she had learned to read, went quiet. Poole had confirmed everything. He had been approached by an intermediary employed by Whitmore Valley Properties 8 months ago. He had been paid $940 in 3 installments to remove the 1873 coal survey record from the Cheyenne Land Office files and deliver it to a courier whose name he claimed not to know. He had documentation of the payments he had kept at Webb wrote because Poole was a man who understood that paper was the only protection a person in his position actually had. The courier had been identified from Poole's partial description as a man named Davis, who was employed by Consolidated Territorial Survey. It's a complete chain, Eleanor said. Whitmore to his holding company, to the survey company, to Davis to Poole. 5 steps, but Webb can document all 5. Will Poole testify? Nathan asked. He's already agreed to, Eleanor said. Webb says he negotiated a significantly reduced penalty for his cooperation. She paused. He's scared, Nathan. He made a terrible decision for $900, and he's been living with it for 8 months. I think he's actually relieved. Nathan looked at the letter. This goes to the commission. Webb is filing it today as supplementary evidence, Eleanor said. Combined with the Farrow affidavit and the 9 family documentation, the commission now has a chain of criminal conduct connected to a pattern of fraud across 14,000 acres of territorial land. She said it plainly, matter-of-factly, the way she said everything. But Nathan heard something underneath it, the exhaustion of a woman who had been running on the fuel of necessity for a very long time and was only now, when the horizon had come into view, beginning to feel the full weight of the distance traveled. Eleanor, he said. She looked up from the letter. Sit down, he said. She opened her mouth. Please, he said. She sat down. Nathan put the letter aside and looked at her directly, the full, unguarded attention he had been giving her, more and more often the look that cost him something, and he gave anyway. You've been going since the day you got off that train, he said. You arrived in a town that was unkind to you, in a house that was cold in every way that mattered, with a man who didn't know how to be in the same room as another person anymore. And instead of protecting yourself, which you had every right to do, you just... He stopped, found the word worked. You worked at everything. Eleanor looked at her hands. I didn't come here to be a problem to solve, she said. I know that, he said. That's not what I'm saying. What are you saying? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means a man is being careful because what he wants to say matters, and he doesn't want to get it wrong. I'm saying... Nathan said, that I see you, that's all. I wanted to make sure you knew that someone sees what this has actually cost. Eleanor felt something crack open quietly in the specific place she had been holding sealed for years. Not dramatically. The way ice breaks in spring, the slow, unstoppable giving way of something that has been under pressure for a very long time. She did not cry. She was not a person who cried easily, which was a thing her whole life had made of her, and she wasn't sorry for it. But she sat very still for a long moment, and Nathan sat across from her, and neither of them filled the space with words, and it was one of the most human moments Eleanor Whitfield. Eleanor Cole had experienced in longer than she could measure. Then she straightened. "There's still work to do," she said. "I know," he said. "But not today." She looked at him. "Today," Nathan said, "you're going to eat a meal without looking at the ledger. And then you're going to do whatever you want to do that isn't related to Charles Whitmore or federal land commissions or Gerald Poole." He paused. "What do you want to do?" She thought about it. "The garden," she said. "The rose section." "Then do that," he said. She nodded. She stood. Then she said without looking at him directly, "Come with me." A pause. "I don't know anything about roses," he said. "I know," she said. "Come anyway." And he did. The commission investigator arrived 3 weeks later. His name was Arthur Crane, and he was a federal man in his 40s, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have done important things in difficult places for a long time. He came to the Cole Ranch first, which meant something that Webb had framed the Coles as the primary complainants and the most organized source of documentation. He spent 2 hours at the kitchen table with Eleanor going through the compiled materials. He asked precise questions. She gave precise answers. He asked about the 9 families, and she produced the written statements organized chronologically by the date of Whitmore's first documented contact with each holding. At the end of 2 hours, Crane closed his folder and looked at her. "How long did it take you to compile this?" he asked. "The last 3 weeks," she said. "The foundational research took the 2 weeks before that." "You're not a lawyer," he said. "No," she said. "What are you?" he asked, not rudely, with the genuine curiosity of someone taking an accurate measure. Eleanor thought about how to answer that. "Someone who had a reason to learn what was needed," she said. Crane looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Nathan, who had been sitting quietly at the other end of the table, in the way he often sat when Eleanor was working, present, not interrupting, available if needed. "You have a strong case," Crane said. "I won't tell you it's certain because nothing is certain, and I won't tell you Whitmore won't fight it because he will. But the documentation is thorough and the pattern of conduct is clear." He paused. "The Poole testimony is significant, combined with the Farrow affidavit and the corporate filing evidence." He stopped with the restrained manner of a man who didn't give false hope, but also didn't withhold honest assessment. "This is a serious case." "What happens next?" Eleanor asked. "I take the documentation back to the commission," Crane said. "We formally notify Whitmore of the investigation. He'll have 30 days to respond." He paused. "During that 30 days, you can expect him to intensify local pressure. He'll try everything he hasn't tried yet." "What hasn't he tried yet?" Nathan asked. Crane looked at him steadily. "He'll try to get to your witnesses," he said. "The 9 families. He'll make offers, apply pressure, find individual vulnerabilities." He paused. "People under sustained pressure sometimes make decisions they regret." Eleanor looked at Nathan. "We'll call a meeting," she said. "Today. All 9 families. I want them to know what's coming before it gets here." Crane stood gathering his materials. He looked at Eleanor one more time with the assessing look he'd had since he arrived. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "in 15 years with the commission, I've seen a lot of land fraud cases. Most of them come to us when people are already losing. This one came to us while you still had something to defend." He paused. "That matters. Usually the evidence is already gone." "The evidence wasn't gone," Eleanor said. "It was just scattered. People had pieces they didn't know were connected." "You connected them," Crane said. "People connected themselves," she said. "I just sat at Ruth Henley's table and listened." Crane put on his hat. "I'll be in touch through Mr. Webb," he said. He nodded to Nathan. "You've got a good advocate here." "I know," Nathan said. Crane left. Nathan looked at Eleanor across the kitchen. "He was impressed," Nathan said. "He was professional," Eleanor said, already opening the ledger. "I need to write to all 9 families today." "Eleanor," she looked up. "Accept the compliment," he said. She looked at him. Then she said fine. He was a little impressed. The corner of Nathan's mouth moved. A lot impressed. "Write to the families," she said. "We have work to do." Whitmore moved exactly as Crane had predicted. Within a week of being formally notified of the commission investigation, he made offers to 3 of the 9 families. The offers were better than his previous ones, the desperation of a man who understood the window was closing. 2 families held. 1 didn't. The Carey family, who had the smallest holding and the largest debt load, took the offer on a Wednesday morning. Eleanor heard about it from Ruth, and she sat with it for a while before she said anything. Because she understood. She did not like it, and she knew it weakened the pattern documentation, but she understood the Careys. She understood what debt felt like when it was the air you breathed. She understood taking the exit when it appeared even imperfect, even at the cost of something larger. She went to see Margaret Carey. Margaret answered the door with the expression of a woman steeling herself for judgment. Eleanor said, "I'm not here to make you feel worse about a decision you've already made." Margaret's expression broke open slightly. "Come in," she said. Eleanor came in. She sat at Margaret's kitchen table, which was smaller than Ruth's and had the particular organized neatness of a household managing carefully. "I need to know," Eleanor said, "whether your documentation, the copies you kept of Whitmore's filings and offers, whether you'll still let us use them. You took his offer, but the records of what he did to your family are still true." Margaret looked at her. "Would they still be valid if we've settled?" "A settlement doesn't make the conduct that preceded it false," Eleanor said. "You were defrauded. You took a settlement because you needed to. Those are 2 separate facts." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Does Nathan know you came here?" she asked. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Does he blame us?" "No," Eleanor said. And she meant it, because she knew Nathan, and Nathan did not spend energy on blame for people who had made the only choice available to them. Margaret looked at her hands on the table. "We didn't want to," she said. "Robert and I talked all night, but the banknote comes due in January, and with the legal uncertainty," she stopped. "I know," Eleanor said. "I kept the copies," Margaret said. "I never stopped keeping copies." She looked up. "You can have them. Whatever you need." Eleanor reached across the table and covered her hand briefly. "Thank you," she said. She walked back to the ranch with the Carey documentation under her arm, and the weight of what had just happened sitting alongside everything else she was carrying, and she let herself feel it honestly. The anger at a system that wore people down until they had no options left. The grief for a family that had deserved better. And underneath both of those things, the stubborn, persisting fact that they were still in this, still standing. She was in the yard when Billy came running from the direction of the South Road. She stopped. Billy never ran. "Mrs. Cole," he said, arriving slightly out of breath, which was also something Billy never was. "Man just came from town, said to tell you and Mr. Cole Whitmore's called a community meeting, tonight, at the church hall." Eleanor stood very still. "Did the man say what it's about?" "Said Whitmore's going to present what he's calling evidence," Billy said. "About the federal case." He paused. "And about you." "She found Nathan in the barn," she told him. He listened with the stillness of a man who has been expecting a particular blow for long enough that when it lands, the landing itself is almost a relief. "About you," he said. That's what Billy said. "Yes," she said. "What does he have?" Nathan asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know what he found, or who he talked to, or what he's going to say." She paused. "But I think he's going to try to dismantle me in public tonight. And I think he's calculated that if he does it in front of the whole community at once, with enough authority, it will be harder to recover from than anything he's done privately." Nathan looked at her. "Do you want to go?" he asked. "Yes," she said without hesitation, even knowing he's going to say things, especially knowing that. Eleanor said, "If I'm not there, he tells the story to an empty seat. If I'm there, he has to tell it to my face." She held Nathan's gaze. "And he doesn't know what I know. He doesn't know I've already heard the worst version of what people think of me every day of my life, and I'm still here." Nathan looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he said, "We go together." "Yes," she said. "We go together."
But amen.
The church hall that evening was fuller than Eleanor had ever seen it. Word had traveled fast, the way word always traveled in Silver Creek, and people had come with the particular energy of a town that knows it is about to witness something significant. Eleanor felt their attention the moment she and Nathan walked in, the shift of it, the weight of it, all of it landing on her. She did not drop her eyes. She found Ruth and James Henley near the left side of the room and moved toward them. Nathan beside her, and Ruth took one look at Eleanor's face and said nothing except to make room. Whitmore was at the front of the hall. He had the ease of a man on his own ground, dressed with the same careful authority as always. He had two men with him, one she didn't recognize. One she did because he had a notebook and had stood at the end of the South Road watching. He saw Eleanor come in. Something moved through his expression. Surprise quickly managed. He had not expected her to come. Good, Eleanor thought. Reverend Patterson opened the meeting with the visible discomfort of a decent man who had not wanted to allow this gathering, but had not found legal grounds to refuse it. He said something about community dialogue, about everyone speaking and listening with respect, and then he sat down and looked at his hands. Whitmore spoke for 20 minutes. He presented what he called concerns about the Federal Commission investigation, framing it as an outside interference in territorial affairs, as a precedent that threatened every landowner in the valley, as something that had been initiated by people who didn't understand how the territory worked. He did not mention his own corporate entities by name. He did not mention Gerald Poole. He spoke in the rounded, reasonable language of a man who had spent decades being persuasive in public. Then he turned to Eleanor. "I think this community deserves to know," he said with the regret of a man who was about to say something unfortunate, that he felt duty-bound to say something about the woman who has been at the center of this legal campaign. The hall was completely silent. Eleanor Cole arrived in Silver Creek 2 months ago as a mail-order bride, Whitmore said. A woman nobody in this valley knew. A woman who came from circumstances in Chicago that were, he paused with practiced precision, difficult to verify. He looked around the room with the expression of a man sharing a burden. "I have in my possession documentation suggesting that the matrimonial agency through which she was engaged has a record of irregularities, that the representation she made of herself to that agency was not entirely accurate." Murmurs moved through the room. Eleanor felt Nathan beside her go very still. "I raise this," Whitmore said, "not to harm anyone personally, but because this community has been encouraged to trust and follow a woman whose background is uncertain, and I think people here deserve to make informed decisions." He looked at Eleanor then, directly, and Eleanor understood in that moment exactly what he was doing and exactly what he was expecting. He was expecting the old Eleanor, the woman who lowered her head, the woman who shrank when someone with power pointed a light at the things she was ashamed of. She stood up. The movement itself caused a ripple in the room. People turned. Nathan put his hand on her arm, not to stop her. She could feel the difference, but as presence. She stepped into the aisle. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. Her voice was clear and it carried. "I'd like to respond if that's allowed." Patterson looked at her, then at Whitmore. Then, with the decision of a man who had been looking for a reason to do the right thing, he said, "Of course, Mrs. Cole." Eleanor turned to face the room. All of it. Every face, every pair of eyes, every person who had whispered at the station or fallen silent at the dry goods store or wondered whether she belonged here. She had thought about what to say on the ride in. She had thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything, and she had decided on the truth. Not because the truth was safe, it wasn't, but because she was done with the cost of protecting herself from her own history. "Mr. Whitmore is correct that I misrepresented myself to the matrimonial agency," she said. "A photograph that was not mine was submitted with my application. I knew about it and I allowed it, and that was wrong." She paused. "I told Nathan about it before we had been an hour on the road from this station. I gave him the truth and left the decision to him. He chose to continue." She looked around the room. "What Mr. Whitmore has not told you is that this characterization of my background has nothing to do with a survey filed in 1873. It has nothing to do with water rights or missing land office records, or a company called Consolidated Territorial Survey that his own holding company created and controls." She paused. "What it has to do with is this. He has run out of ways to fight the evidence against him, so he has decided to fight me instead. Because he looked at me 2 months ago and decided I was the weakest part of this household. Very quiet. Very complete quiet." "He was wrong about that," Eleanor said. "But I understand why he thought so. I arrived here with 1 suitcase and a borrowed photograph and nothing to recommend me that anyone in this room could see on the surface." She looked at the faces around her not with anger, but with something level and honest. "The people who have worked alongside me in the past 2 months know what I actually am. They can make their own judgment." She sat down. The silence held for 3 more seconds. Then Ruth Henley stood up. "I've known Eleanor Cole for 2 months," Ruth said, "and in that time I have watched her build a legal case against systematic fraud that 12 years of this community's individual efforts failed to build." She looked at Whitmore. "I've also watched Charles Whitmore pay a land office clerk $940 to steal a survey record." She sat down. Robert Walsh stood. "He offered me $14,000 to walk away from land my grandfather built," he said. 3 days after mysteriously the filed record of our boundary survey went missing from Cheyenne." He sat down. Margaret Carey, who Eleanor had not expected to see tonight, and who had come quietly and sat near the back, stood slowly. "My family took his offer," she said. Her voice was steady. "We took it because we had no choice. And Eleanor Cole came to my house 2 days ago and didn't say a word of judgment. She just asked if she could still use our documentation." She sat down. Tom Briggs, large, red-faced the man from the station, stood last. "I said something unkind to this woman the day she arrived," he said. He did not look at Eleanor. He looked at Whitmore. "I'm not going to let someone else do it in a place I attend services." He sat down. Whitmore stood at the front of the room with the expression of a man watching the ground change under his feet. He was not finished. Eleanor knew that. A man like Whitmore was never finished after one loss. But what had just happened in this room was not a small thing. What had just happened was 9 families and a reverend and a feed store owner declaring in front of each other in a community that ran on the record of who said what to whom that they saw Eleanor Cole clearly, and that they had made their choice about what they saw. Patterson closed the meeting. People moved toward the doors in the way people move after something significant, quietly processing. Nathan stood beside Eleanor as the room emptied. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "That was not what I expected." "What did you expect?" she asked. "I expected to have to defend you," he said. "I had things prepared to say." She looked at him. "What were you going to say?" "That anyone who questioned your right to be here would answer to me," he said simply. "That I knew exactly who I married, and I'd made the decision knowing everything, and the only people who had any business judging my wife were people whose land I hadn't once saved from flooding, or whose fence I hadn't once repaired for free." He paused. "I had a list." Eleanor looked at him. "I didn't need it," he said. "No," she said. "They didn't need to hear it from you." She paused. "They needed to say it themselves." Nathan looked at her with something that had been growing in his expression for weeks and was no longer entirely contained. "Eleanor," he said. "Nathan," she said. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need you to not turn it into a practical conversation about strategy." She waited. "I love you," he said. "That's what I need to say. I didn't expect to. I didn't plan to. But you are." He stopped, because Nathan Cole was not a man with easy access to this kind of language, and he was finding it the hard way. "You are the most remarkable person I have ever known. And I should have said it before tonight, and I'm saying it now." Eleanor looked at him. The church hall was nearly empty around them. Candlelight, the smell of cold air and old wood, the sound of the town of Silver Creek continuing outside. She had spent 26 years being told in word and gesture and deliberate omission that she was not the woman someone would choose, not the one who got chosen, not the face people remembered, not the name on the list, not the woman worth staying for. She looked at Nathan Cole, who had picked up her suitcase at a train station when everyone was whispering, who had sat with her until past 10 o'clock over a deed box, who had driven into town slowly and with no apology, who had stood in a barn and said all right in a way that meant more than the words. "I know," she said softly. "I've known for a while." "Is that all you're going to say?" he asked. She considered him. "I love you too," she said. "I've been trying not to on the grounds that it was impractical and premature." "It is impractical," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Does that change it?" he asked. "No," she said. "It doesn't change it at all." Nathan reached over and took her hand. He held it the way he had at the kitchen table, deliberately fully, with the particular warmth of a man who had decided this was real and was not going to pretend otherwise. Eleanor let him. Outside, Silver Creek continued making its noise. And inside the church hall, something settled into place that had been working its way there since a train arrived 40 minutes late, and a woman stepped onto a platform holding a heavy suitcase and refused to lower her eyes. They drove home from the church hall in silence, but it was the fullest silence Eleanor had ever sat inside. Nathan held the reins with one hand. His other hand was on the seat between them, close enough that their fingers touched at the knuckle, and neither of them moved away from that. The night was cold, and the stars were the kind that made the sky look crowded, and Eleanor looked up at them and thought about everything that had just happened in that hall and understood with the particular clarity that comes after a long fight that something had permanently shifted, not finished, shifted. "He's going to come back harder," she said. "Yes," Nathan said. "The commission notification will make him desperate," she said. "Desperate men make mistakes, but they also make damage." "I know," Nathan said. "We need Webb ready for anything in the next 30 days, she said. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Eleanor." She looked at him. "Not tonight," he said, not unkindly, with the specific gentleness of a man who had learned how she worked and was offering her something she would not have asked for herself. She looked back at the stars. "Not tonight," she agreed. She didn't open the ledger when they got home. She made tea instead, which she rarely did. Coffee was the working drink, tea was the other thing, the slower thing. And Nathan sat across the table from her, without the account books or the legal papers between them, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with water rights. He told her about the first horse he had ever broken, which had taken him 11 days, and left him with a scar on his left forearm he still had. She told him about her father's habit of reading aloud from whatever book he was in the middle of, regardless of whether anyone else in the room was listening, which had driven her sister mad, and which Eleanor had secretly loved. They talked until past midnight. When Eleanor finally went upstairs, she stood at the window of her room for a moment before the darkness outside, and she let herself feel not the strategy, not the next step, not what needed to be done in the morning. Just this. The specific improbable fact of where she was and what had become of her life in 2 months. She had come to Wyoming Territory with nothing. She was leaving nothing behind her in Chicago worth returning to. She had arrived expecting a practical arrangement, and she had found this. Work that mattered. People who had become real. A man who had said, "I love you" in an empty church hall without rehearsing it. She pressed her hand flat against the cold glass of the window. Then she went to bed, and for the first time in longer than she could measure, she slept without her mind continuing to move. The commission's formal investigation began on a Monday, 8 days after the church hall meeting. Arthur Crane returned with 2 other federal officers and a mandate that was broader than anything Webb had initially hoped for. The investigation covered not just the coal water rights, but all 9 holdings, and it carried the authority of the Federal Land Commission, which meant it operated entirely outside Judge Abernathy's territorial jurisdiction. Whitmore hired 3 lawyers. Nathan's response to hearing this was to look at Eleanor and say, "We have Webb and you. I'll take that trade." Webb came to the ranch to prepare them for what the formal investigation process would look like. He sat at the kitchen table that had become the center of the entire legal effort that had held the deed box and the ledger, and Ruth's coffee cups, and Henry Farrow's affidavit, and all the paper weight of a fight for 14,000 acres, and he walked them through the timeline. 30 days for Whitmore to respond to the commission's formal inquiry. Depositions from all parties including Gerald Poole and Henry Farrow. A review of all documentation. A hearing before the commission itself in Cheyenne. "The hearing," Eleanor said. "Who presents?" "I present the legal argument," Webb said. "You and Nathan testify as the primary complainants. Henry Farrow testifies on the survey records. Poole testifies on the record removal." He paused. "And I'd like to present your analysis of the systematic fraud pattern as a written submission to the commission, not as testimony as evidence." Eleanor looked at him. "My analysis. The compiled documentation across 9 holdings with your organizational framework showing the pattern of conduct," Webb said. "Crane told me it was the clearest presentation of systematic fraud evidence he'd seen in a land case. I'd like to put it formally in front of the commission." Nathan watched Eleanor absorb this. She did not perform modesty. She thought about it practically. "Will the commission accept a submission from a non-lawyer?" "From a party to the proceeding, yes," Webb said. "You're the wife of the primary complainant. Your submission goes into the record." "Then yes," she said. "I'll prepare a final version." Webb nodded. He picked up his hat to leave, then stopped. "One more thing," he said. "Whitmore's lawyers have subpoenaed the Chesterfield Matrimonial Agency records." The room went quiet. "The photograph," Eleanor said. "Yes," Webb said. He looked at her carefully. "Whatever they find in those records, the discrepancy in the application, they're going to try to introduce it in the hearing as a character question. To suggest that someone who misrepresented herself to a marriage agency is an unreliable source of testimony in a land fraud case." Eleanor looked at the table. "It's a weak argument legally," Webb said. "I can challenge it, but I want you prepared for it to be said in front of the commission." "I've said it myself in front of this entire town," Eleanor said. "I think I can manage Cheyenne." Webb looked at Nathan. Nathan said, "Is there anything we need to do about it?" "Make sure your own account of the full circumstances is documented," Webb said. "That you knew before the marriage proceeded that it didn't affect your decision that the marriage is and has been genuine." He paused with the slight awkwardness of a professional man navigating personal territory. "Evidence of a genuine marriage. Community members who can attest to the nature of your household." "Ruth Henley," Nathan said immediately. "Reverend Patterson," Eleanor said. "Tom Briggs spoke up at the hall," Nathan said. "He'll speak again if I ask him." Webb nodded, visibly relieved to be back on practical ground. "Good. I'll draft the affidavits." After he left, Eleanor sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "He's going to put the photograph in front of federal commissioners." "Yes," Nathan said. "He's going to say I'm a liar," she said. "In the most official room I've ever been in." "Yes?" Nathan said. He sat down across from her. "Does that change anything?" She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "No," she said. "It doesn't change anything. I'm just—" She stopped. "I wanted you to know I'm not untouched by it. I can handle it, and I will handle it, and it still costs something. I wanted to say that out loud to someone who wouldn't tell me I shouldn't feel it. Nathan looked at her steadily. I know, he said, and I'm not going to tell you that. Good, she said. She opened the ledger. Now let me start on the final version of the fraud analysis. The next 3 weeks moved with the particular compressed intensity of time that contains too much. Webb filed responses to Whitmore's lawyers on a Tuesday. Whitmore's team filed counter-motions on a Thursday. Crane requested supplementary documentation on a Friday. Eleanor produced it over the weekend. Nathan rode to Laramie to meet with Henry Farrow and ensure the deposition was fully prepared. Webb confirmed that Poole's lawyer had finalized his cooperation agreement, and Silver Creek changed. It changed the way communities change when something that has been private becomes public, and the public rendering of it forces people to take sides they had been avoiding. The church hall meeting had done. That had made it impossible for people to continue the comfortable position of waiting to see which way things went. Most of them chose. Robert Walsh organized a meeting of his own among the ranchers without Eleanor's involvement, just the men of the valley sitting together and talking about what Whitmore had done to each of them and what they were willing to do about it. Nathan went. He came back and told Eleanor it had lasted 4 hours, and that at the end of it, every man at the table had signed a statement attesting to his experience with Whitmore's method. All of them, Eleanor asked. Even the ones who took his offers, Nathan said. 2 of them signed. They said they deserved better than what they got, and they weren't going to pretend otherwise. Eleanor wrote their names in the ledger. Clara Haynes was quieter now. Not gone. A woman like Clara did not simply disappear, but quieter. Eleanor passed her twice on the street in the following weeks, and Clara's pleasant surface smile had lost some of its power, the way a weapon loses power when the person it's aimed at stops flinching. Eleanor nodded to her each time and kept walking. The garden was growing. The rose canes she had spent weeks nursing were showing new growth, slow, tentative, but real. Billy had found through some network of ranch hands that Eleanor didn't fully understand the original variety that Catherine Cole had planted, and 2 replacement canes arrived from a nursery in Denver wrapped in burlap. Eleanor planted them on a Saturday morning with Nathan beside her, which was not something she had planned, but which had simply happened because he was there, and there was work to do, and they had long since stopped requiring reasons to be in the same place. He held the cane while she packed soil around the base. She would have said something about this, he said. What would she have said? He thought about it. That things coming back to life after a hard winter isn't a miracle, he said. It's just what things do if you leave them room. Eleanor pressed the soil firm around the roots. She was right, she said. Nathan crouched beside her, looking at the cane. I want you to know something, he said. She waited. I don't think of this as her garden anymore, he said. I think of it as yours. I think of the whole house as yours. He paused. I want you to know that it belongs to you, not as a legal matter, as a fact. Eleanor looked at him. Thank you, she said. And because she was Eleanor, and because she could not leave a thing at its emotional surface without also grounding it somewhere real, she added, I put the roses in the southeast corner because they'll get the best morning light there. Nathan smiled. It was a full one, not the near smile she had learned to read, but the real one, which she had seen exactly 4 times and which changed his entire face. I noticed, he said. The hearing was set for a Wednesday in December, 6 weeks after the commission investigation formally opened. They went to Cheyenne the day before, Nathan and Eleanor and Webb, and they sat in Webb's office until 10 o'clock, going over the presentation for the last time. Eleanor had prepared her written submission, 42 pages, organized by date, and holding with a summary analysis that laid out Whitmore's pattern of conduct with the clean, logical structure of someone who had been thinking about nothing else for 2 months. Webb read the final version the night before the hearing and said, This is better than most legal briefs I've filed. You're a good lawyer, Eleanor said. Your filings gave me the model. I'm going to choose to take that as a compliment, Webb said. She slept better than she expected to. In the morning, Nathan knocked on her hotel room door and said through the wood, "Breakfast, 20 minutes." And she said, "I'll be there." And she was, and they ate without talking about the hearing, because everything that could be said had been said, and what remained was simply doing it. The Federal Land Commission hearing room was formal and not large. A long table at the front for the 3 commissioners. Webb's table on one side, Whitmore's 3 lawyers on the other. Seats behind for witnesses and interested parties. Henry Farrow was already there when they arrived, sitting straight-backed with a leather folder on his lap. He nodded at Eleanor, and she nodded back. Crane was there off to one side with the neutral expression of a man who had done his part, and now waited for others to do theirs. Whitmore came in 5 minutes before the session opened. He looked at Eleanor across the room. She looked back at him without expression, and then looked at the commissioners taking their seats. The lead commissioner was a woman named Margaret Holloway, which Eleanor had not expected, and which quietly steadied her. A woman in that chair, in that room in 1881, had gotten there by being unassailable, and unassailable was exactly what Eleanor needed across that table. The hearing began. Webb presented the case with the precision of a man who had spent 2 months preparing for this specific hour. He laid out the chain of events cleanly: the coal water rights, the missing survey record, the Consolidated Territorial Survey connection to Whitmore's holding company, the pool testimony, the Farrow affidavit. He submitted Eleanor's written analysis of the systematic fraud pattern as Exhibit 14. He was clear, organized, and exactly as long as necessary, and no longer. Whitmore's lead lawyer, a large man named Carver, who moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning in rooms like this, challenged everything methodically. He challenged the relevance of the Poole testimony on grounds that Poole was a compromised witness. He challenged the admissibility of Eleanor's analysis on grounds that it was a lay document. He challenged the Farrow affidavit on grounds that field notes were not the same as official filed records. Commissioner Holloway overruled 2 of the 3 challenges without visible hesitation. On the third, she looked at Eleanor's submission and said, "This document is admitted as the factual compilation of a party to the proceeding. Counsel's objection is noted." Carver moved on. He was a skilled lawyer, and Eleanor gave him that. Privately, he managed the photograph without making it grotesque. He raised it as a question of character and credibility, noted that Eleanor Cole had submitted false documentation to a matrimonial agency, and suggested that the commission should weigh the testimony and analysis of a woman who had demonstrated willingness to misrepresent herself. Commissioner Holloway looked at Eleanor. "Mrs. Cole," she said, "you may respond." Eleanor stood. She had thought about this moment many times. She had prepared language. She had drafted and revised. She had consulted Webb. And then the night before, she had set all of that aside and decided to simply say the true thing. "I submitted a photograph that was not mine to a matrimonial agency," she said. "I knew about it and I allowed it. I told my husband the truth before we had been an hour on the road together. He made an informed decision to proceed." She paused. "That is the full account of what happened." She looked at Commissioner Holloway. "I'd like to suggest that what I did with a photograph has no logical relationship to whether Charles Whitmore paid a government employee to steal a survey record. Those are 2 separate facts, and conflating them serves only one purpose: to make you look at me instead of at the evidence." Gammon son sitio. Holloway made no visible reaction. She wrote something down. "Thank you, Mrs. Cole," she said. "You may be seated." Carver was on his feet. "I'd like to establish—" "I think the response was adequate," Holloway said in the tone of a woman who ended things when she chose to. "Please proceed with your next point." Eleanor sat down. Webb beside her did not look at her, but she saw him exhale. Henry Farrow testified for 40 minutes and was unshakable. He had his father's field notes open in front of him, and he walked through every measurement, every marker, every notation, with the meticulous thoroughness of a man who had spent his professional life making sure things were accurate. Whitmore's lawyers tried to find inconsistencies. There were none. James Farrow had been the most careful man anyone who worked with him had ever known, and his field notes proved it on every page. When Carver pressed Henry on whether field notes could be considered as reliable as official filed records, Henry said in the patient tone of a professional speaking to a layman, "The official filed record is derived from the field notes. The field notes are the original. What Mr. Whitmore's company removed from the Cheyenne Land Office was a copy. The original has been in my office for 8 years." The hearing room was very quiet. Carver said, "No further questions." Gerald Poole was the last witness called before lunch. He looked diminished from the man Eleanor had never met, but somehow felt she knew the man who had bought a house he couldn't afford, and then spent 8 months waiting for the weight of it to land on him. He answered questions carefully with the particular precision of a man who had been instructed by his own lawyer to say exactly what was true and nothing more. Yes, he had been approached by an intermediary. Yes, he had been paid $940. Yes, he had removed the coal survey record from the files. Yes, he had delivered it to a courier named Davis. Yes, he had understood Davis to be employed by Consolidated Territorial Survey. And then, because Webb had asked for this specifically, and Crane had confirmed the commission would allow it, Poole said one more thing. "I want to say," he started, and his lawyer put a hand on his arm and Poole shook his head. "I want to say that I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew it the day I did it. I told myself it was just a piece of paper and nobody would get hurt, but I knew." He looked at the table. "I'm sorry for it." Silence. Commissioner Holloway said, "Thank you, Mr. Poole." The afternoon session was Whitmore's defense. Carver called 2 witnesses, a surveyor named Hammond, who had been hired to provide an alternative analysis of the Cedar Spring boundaries, and a man from the Territorial Land Office, who testified to standard records management procedures, presumably to suggest that records went missing through ordinary administrative error. Hammond was the more dangerous of the 2. He was professional and specific, and he presented an analysis suggesting that the 1873 survey had placed markers approximately 300 yards east of the positions specified in the original grant, which, if true, would mean the water rights were based on an inaccurate survey. Webb cross-examined him for 20 minutes. He asked Hammond whether he had personally visited the Cedar Spring location to verify marker positions. Hammond said the positions had been calculated from existing territorial maps. Webb asked which maps. Hammond named them. Webb submitted into evidence a letter from the Wyoming Territorial Survey Office, obtained 2 weeks earlier at Eleanor's suggestion, stating that the 2 maps Hammond had cited had been revised in 1878 to correct a drafting error in the original 1871 editions, and that any survey analysis, based on the pre-1878 versions, would show a systematic eastward displacement of approximately 300 yards. The hearing room went very still. Carver was on his feet. "Objection. On what grounds?" Holloway said. A pause. "I'll allow it," Holloway said. Webb looked at Hammond. "Were you aware of the 1878 map revision when you conducted your analysis?" Hammond's composure held, but it was doing work. "I may not have had the updated editions," he said carefully. "You may not have," Webb agreed. "Or you may have been provided the old editions specifically so your analysis would reach a particular conclusion." He let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. No further questions. Eleanor had found the map revision in a footnote in one of the Territorial Land Survey reports she had been reading 6 weeks earlier. She had flagged it in the margin and written next to it, "Important check, Hammond's source materials." She had given it to Webb the following morning. She did not look at Whitmore. She kept her eyes on Commissioner Holloway and watched the lead commissioner write something long and deliberate in her notes. The hearing concluded at 4 o'clock. Holloway said the commission would issue its ruling within 15 days. People moved toward the doors. Carver went directly to Whitmore and spoke in a low voice, and whatever he said, Whitmore's face received it without movement, the way a man receives information he has prepared for and still does not want. Webb shook Eleanor's hand and Nathan's. "That was as clean as I've ever seen a commission hearing go," he said. "I won't tell you what I think the ruling will be." "You don't need to," Eleanor said. They were 14 days into the 15 when the ruling came. It came by federal courier to the Cole Ranch on a Thursday morning, addressed to Nathan Cole, and forwarded copies to Marcus Webb, Arthur Crane, and each of the 9 families. Nathan brought it in from the yard. He stood at the kitchen table and held it for exactly 1 moment, and Eleanor stood across from him, and they looked at it the way you look at the last door before you find out what's behind it. Then Nathan handed it to Eleanor. She opened it. She read it once. Then she set it on the table and looked at Nathan. "The commission finds in favor of the Cole water rights," she said. "The 1873 survey is validated in full. The Cedar Spring boundaries are confirmed as originally recorded." She paused. "The commission is referring the matter of the missing survey record to the Federal Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation of Charles Whitmore and Consolidated Territorial Survey Company for fraud against territorial land grant holders." Nathan stood very still. "All 9 holdings?" he asked. "All 9 holdings are included in the referral," Eleanor said. "The commission has issued a temporary protection order on all disputed properties pending the criminal investigation. Whitmore can't move on any of them." The kitchen was completely silent. Then Nathan sat down. He sat down the way a man sits when the weight he has been carrying is suddenly no longer entirely his, and the muscles that have been holding it don't quite know what to do with the relief. Eleanor sat across from him. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. Then Nathan said in a voice that came from somewhere deep and real, "My father built this ranch from open land. He filed that water rights claim himself. He stood in a field in 1873 with James Farrow and watched him set those markers." He stopped. He stopped again. Eleanor did not fill the silence. She let him have it. "He would have liked you," Nathan said finally. "He would have said you were the most practical woman he'd ever met, and then he would have meant it as the highest compliment he knew." Eleanor looked at her hands on the table. She thought about a man she had never met who had built something worth protecting, and about a woman she had never met who had planted roses and thought life coming back was simply what it did, and about a town that had whispered about her on a platform and had come to stand up in a church hall, and about all the distance between those 2 things. She looked at Nathan. "Write to the 9 families," she said. "They should hear it from us directly before the formal notice arrives." "Yes," he said. He didn't move yet. "Nathan," she said. "I know," he said. "Give me a minute." She gave him a minute. The news moved through Silver Creek like water finding its level fast, unstoppable, reaching everywhere. By Friday morning, people knew. By Friday afternoon, Robert Walsh had ridden to 3 neighboring ranches personally. By Saturday, Ruth Henley had organized something that was not quite a celebration and not quite a community meeting, but was somewhere between both. And it happened at the Henley Ranch with too much food and too many people, and a fiddle player who showed up without being invited because he had heard something worth playing for. Eleanor stood near the door at some point in the evening and watched the room. She watched Robert Walsh laugh for the first time in the 1.5 years she had known him. She watched Margaret Carey stand with her husband with the particular posture of a couple who had been through something hard and come out the other side still together. She watched Billy, who was 19, and had never once to Eleanor's knowledge attended a social event, standing in the corner eating pie with the focused intensity of someone who considered pie a serious undertaking. She watched Ruth, who caught her eye across the room and smiled the smile of a woman who had told someone to build something solid and watched them do it. She watched Nathan. He was talking to Reverend Patterson in the way he talked to people now. Not the performed civility of a man going through social motions, but the actual engagement of someone present in his own life. Patterson was saying something, and Nathan was listening with the real attention he brought to things that mattered. And then he said something back, and Patterson laughed, and Nathan's face did the thing Eleanor had come to quietly love, the slight shift that meant he was pleased about something and wasn't going to say so. Then he looked up and found her across the room. He looked at her the way he had been looking at her for weeks fully, without the flatness that had been there at the beginning, with the particular quality of a man who sees someone clearly and has decided that what he sees is where he wants to be. He crossed the room to her. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," she said. "Really good." He stood beside her, and they looked at the room together. "Tom Briggs is crying," Nathan said. Eleanor looked. He was right. Tom Briggs, large and red-faced, was standing near the food table with the watery-eyed expression of a man being more emotional than he had planned to be. His wife was patting his arm. "He's relieved," Eleanor said. "He was frightened, I think, that Whitmore would win, and there'd be no way to undo it." "A lot of people were frightened," Nathan said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "Fear is quiet. You don't always see it until it lifts." Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have something to ask you." She looked at him. "We married as a practical arrangement," he said. "That's what it was. I want to ask if you would—" He stopped, found his way through it. "If you would marry me as something else. Not instead of the practical arrangement. I know you and I are both people who need the work to be real, but alongside it." Eleanor looked at him. "You're asking me to marry you again?" she said. "Yes," he said. "In the spring. In the church. With Patterson and Ruth and all of them there." He paused. "I want it on record somewhere that this was a choice. That I chose you and you chose me, and we both knew what we were choosing." Eleanor thought about a train platform and a borrowed photograph and a woman who had spent her life being the wrong one, the plain one, the one who wasn't enough. She thought about deed boxes and federal statutes and rose canes with deep roots. She thought about, "All right," said, in a barn in the dark, meaning everything. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you again." Nathan took her hand. He held it the way he always held it, completely without apology. From across the room, Ruth Henley watched this and said something under her breath that made James Henley smile. The criminal investigation into Charles Whitmore ran through the winter and into the spring. Gerald Poole testified under formal immunity. The courier Davis was identified and brought in. The connection between Whitmore Valley Properties and Consolidated Territorial Survey was documented and entered into federal court record. Marcus Webb filed a civil suit on behalf of all 9 families for damages arising from the fraudulent campaign. Whitmore did not go quietly. He fought every step with the resources of a man who had spent 30 years accumulating the ability to fight. His lawyers were skilled, and he was patient, and there were moments in the winter months when the process stalled in ways that made Eleanor's jaw tight and Nathan's silences longer. But the chain held. It held because Henry Farrow's field notes were unimpeachable. It held because Gerald Poole never wavered. It held because Eleanor's compiled documentation had been thorough enough that there was nowhere to hide a discrepancy. It held because 9 families had signed statements, and not one of them withdrew. In March, Charles Whitmore accepted a negotiated resolution with the federal attorney's office. He did not go to prison, he was too connected for that, and Eleanor was honest with herself about what the law could and could not reach in 1882. But he divested completely from Whitmore Valley Properties, paid restitution to all 9 families, surrendered his interest in the Silver Creek Territorial Bank, and was barred from any land dealings in Wyoming Territory for the remainder of his operating life. He left Silver Creek in April. Eleanor did not watch him go. She was in the garden. The roses were blooming. Both the original canes and the 2 replacements from Denver, all of them red and defiant against the Wyoming wind, exactly as Catherine Cole had said they would be if you gave them room and time, and the right corner of morning light. Billy came to find her when the word came that Whitmore's carriage had left town. "He's gone," Billy said. Eleanor looked at the roses. "Good," she said. Billy stood beside her for a moment, looking at the garden. "Mrs. Cole," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes," she said. "Did you know," he said, "when you started all this, the legal thing, the families, the commission, did you know it was going to work?" Eleanor thought about that honestly. "No," she said. "I knew it was the right thing to do. That's different from knowing it would work." Billy considered that. "But you did it anyway." "Yes," she said. "Why?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the roses. She thought about her father's house in Chicago, which had never had a garden. About a train that arrived 40 minutes late. about a man who had picked up a heavy suitcase without being asked. Because the alternative, she said, was accepting that people like Whitmore get to decide what things are worth, what land is worth, what people are worth. She paused. And I have never been good at accepting that. Billy nodded slowly. Me neither, he said. She looked at him sideways. He was 20 now, almost had aged in ways she could see over the months they'd worked alongside each other. No, she said. I didn't think you were. The second wedding was on a Saturday in May. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony in the church with more warmth than he had managed for many weddings. He later admitted because he had been waiting 4 years for Nathan Cole to be present for his own life again, and he had been a little afraid it wouldn't happen. Ruth Henley sat in the front row and cried openly and made no apology for it. James Henley sat beside her and handed her his handkerchief and looked at the ceiling. The 9 families were there. Billy was there cleaned up in a way that suggested significant effort. Tom Briggs was there with his wife, and he stood straight in a way that said he was taking the occasion seriously and was glad to be in the room. Clara Haynes was not there. Nobody mentioned it. When Reverend Patterson asked Nathan if he took this woman, Nathan said yes, the way he said everything without performance, without volume, with the specific weight of something that had been carefully considered and was completely meant. When he asked Eleanor, she said yes, the way she had come to say most things clearly, directly, without the hesitation of someone who expected to be contradicted. Nathan put a ring on her finger. It had been his mother's. He had told her about it the week before, asked if she minded. He said he thought his mother would have liked her, that she had been a woman who valued people who worked and didn't need to be admired. Eleanor had said she didn't mind at all. She had meant it. After the ceremony, Ruth found Eleanor near the door and hugged her in the decisive way of someone who had made up their mind to do it. I told you, Ruth said. Build something solid. You did, Eleanor said. And you did, Ruth said. You built something that is going to last. She pulled back and looked at Eleanor with the direct warmth she had had from the very beginning. I'm proud of you, Eleanor. I want you to know that. Eleanor held that. Thank you, she said, for all of it. The first cup of coffee and everything after. Ruth waved it off. That's what people are for, she said. And then, because Ruth Henley was incapable of staying entirely serious, she added, also, you made Nathan Cole attend a harvest social, which I had given up on entirely, and for that alone, you have my eternal gratitude. Months later, nearly a year since the train arrived, 40 minutes late, a young girl named Annie Walsh, Robert's youngest daughter, found Eleanor in the garden on an afternoon in early October. Annie was 10 with the serious face of a child who took information very literally, and she had been following Eleanor around for several weeks with the focused admiration of someone conducting a long study. She sat on the garden wall and watched Eleanor work. Mrs. Cole, she said. Annie, Eleanor said. Were you sad? Annie said. When you came here and people said bad things about how you looked. Eleanor sat back on her heels. She thought about the train platform, which felt like a very long time ago, and like last month simultaneously. About the whispers that had traveled through the crowd before she'd even set her suitcase down. About the long history of being the one people looked past. Yes, she said. I was sad. But you didn't act sad, Annie said. No, Eleanor said. Why not? Eleanor looked at the girl. At the serious face, the literal attention, the genuine wanting to know. Because the people who were saying those things had already decided what I was, Eleanor said. And if I acted the way they expected, if I cried or apologized or ran away, then they'd have been right. About all of it. She paused. I wasn't going to let them be right. Annie thought about that carefully. What if they had been right, she said. What if nobody ever changed their mind? Eleanor looked at the roses, which were finishing their season, now preparing for the cold, doing what roses did, drawing back to where the life actually was underground, deep in the roots. Then I'd still have known who I was, Eleanor said. And that would have had to be enough. She looked at Annie. But they did change their minds. Not all of them, but enough. And the ones who mattered most, they saw clearly from the beginning. Annie looked toward the house where Nathan had come to the back door to say something to Billy about the evening's work. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Yes," Eleanor said. Annie nodded with the decisive nod of a child making a conclusion. "He's good," she said. "He is," Eleanor agreed. "Did you know that when you came?" Annie asked. Eleanor thought about a man who had picked up a heavy suitcase and said, "I didn't pay for a picture, I paid for a person." About gray eyes that saw clearly from the first moment. About all right in a barn. "Not exactly," she said, "but I knew something worth staying for." Annie seemed satisfied with that. She slid off the wall and went back toward the house where the other Walsh children were playing. Eleanor turned back to the garden. Nathan appeared at her shoulder a few minutes later in the way he appeared quietly without announcement, simply there when he was needed. "What was she asking?" he said. "Whether I was sad when I came here," Eleanor said. "What did you say?" "The truth," Eleanor said. He was quiet for a moment beside her. "Are you sad now?" he asked. Eleanor looked at the garden, at the house that had been a building and was now a home, at the roses that had been dead canes and were now something that would come back every spring, at the life that had assembled itself around her peace by deliberate peace, out of necessity, and then out of choice. She thought about a woman who had arrived in Silver Creek with one suitcase, a borrowed photograph, and the bone-deep conviction that she was not the woman anyone chose first. She was wrong about that. She had been wrong about it from the moment a cowboy picked up her bag on a train platform and showed her without a single unnecessary word that the right person never needed her to be different. He only needed her to be here. "No," Eleanor Cole said. "I am not sad." And she never was again.